After 10 years of living under my roof, my son-in-law won $90 million in the state lottery. That exact same morning, he threw my suitcase onto the front lawn and told me to pack my bags for a nursing home. I did not yell, I did not beg. I simply picked up my worn-out bag, smiled at him, and asked a single question that would soon destroy his entire life. "Son, did you check the name on the ticket?" Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always comes with a heavy price. My name is Montgomery Hayes. I am 69 years old, and I am about to show you exactly what happens when you underestimate an old man. The dull, heavy thud of my leather suitcase hitting the damp morning grass echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. It popped open on impact, spilling my neatly folded shirts and an old framed photograph of my late wife Loretta onto the lawn. I stood on the sidewalk, the crisp morning air biting at my face, watching the front door of the house I had paid off decades ago. Standing on the porch was Bradley, my 35-year-old son-in-law. His face was flushed red, not with anger, but with a manic, unhinged euphoria. In his right hand, he wildly waved a small rectangular piece of paper. It was a printed lottery ticket. $90 million, Monty, he screamed, his voice cracking with pure greed. $90 million. The days of me living in this cramped, pathetic house are over, and your days of freeloading are done. Get your stuff, old man. Call a cab and check yourself into a nursing home. You are not my problem anymore. He marched down the steps, his expensive designer loafers stepping right over my scattered clothes. Bradley was a financial broker, a man who wore suits that cost more than my first car, yet he never seemed to have a dime to his name. He always acted like he was meant for the elite, a temporary visitor in our middle-class reality. Now, holding that piece of paper, he looked at me with absolute disgust, stripping away the fake politeness he had maintained for the last 10 years. "Do you hear me?" he sneered, pointing a finger directly at my chest. "I am a multimillionaire now. I am done pretending to respect you just because my wife feels sorry for you. For a decade, I have had to look at your tired face every morning. I have had to listen to your boring stories about the good old days. Well, this house is mine now. Jada and I are going to bulldoze this miserable shack and build a mansion. Or maybe we will just sell it for scrap. Either way, you do not belong here. You never did. You are just a broke old man taking up space." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made a neighbor across the street pause their morning walk and stare. "You should be thanking me," Bradley continued, adjusting his silk tie as if he were already addressing a crowd of reporters on television. "I let you stay here. I let you pretend you were the man of the house. But let us be real, Monty. You are a dinosaur. You belong in a sterile room playing bingo, not breathing the same air as a guy worth $90 million. So take your garbage and leave before I call the cops and have you removed for trespassing on my property." I looked at the house behind him. My house. The house I bought 40 years ago with sweat and calloused hands. I was a union electrician for 35 years. I spent 10 years in this very house paying the water bills, the electric bills, and the property taxes out of my hard-earned pension just so Bradley could keep up his illusion of being a successful broker. When the roof leaked 3 winters ago, it was my savings that fixed it. I did it for Jada, my daughter, the little girl I raised. I kept my mouth shut and paid for their groceries when Bradley blew his commission checks on flashy watches and expensive dinners to impress clients he never actually landed. I sacrificed my golden years so he could play pretend. But standing there on the lawn, looking at the pure malice in his pale eyes, I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice to defend my pride or list the thousands of dollars I had poured into his fragile ego over the years. Instead, a deep, profound calm settled over me. I slowly bent down, my old knees aching slightly in the morning chill. I picked up the photograph of Loretta, dusted off the glass, and placed it gently back into my suitcase. I gathered my shirts, closed the worn-out zipper, and stood back up. I gripped the handle of my luggage and looked straight into Bradley's wild, arrogant eyes. I let a slow, quiet smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards. "Congratulations, Bradley," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. $90 million is a whole lot of money. It is truly life-changing. But before you start spending it, let me ask you one simple question. He stopped his gloating, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What?" he snapped. I tilted my head slightly. Son, did you check the name on the ticket? For a fraction of a second, I saw his confident posture falter. A flicker of confusion darted across his face. He looked down at the printed receipt in his hand, his eyes scanning the numbers, the date, the barcode. But his arrogance was a disease that had blinded him completely. He scoffed, his face twisting into a nasty smirk. Nice try, old man. It is a bearer instrument. Whoever holds the ticket gets the gold. Now get off my grass. He turned on his heel, marched back up the steps, and slammed the heavy oak door so hard the front windows rattled. I stood alone on the sidewalk for a moment, listening to the finality of that slam. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my banking folder and tapped on the official state lottery application. The screen loaded, displaying my full legal name, Montgomery Hayes, my verified social security number, and my linked bank account. Right beneath it was a green banner confirming the winning numbers, and at the bottom a bright red security toggle that I had engaged 10 minutes before stepping outside. It read, "Physical ticket locked. Digital ID required for redemption." Bradley thought he held a golden ticket. He had stolen the paper receipt off the kitchen counter this morning while I was making coffee. He did not realize he was holding a worthless piece of paper that was about to drag him straight into a nightmare. After 10 years of living under my roof, my son-in-law won $90 million in the state lottery. That exact same morning, he threw my suitcase onto the front lawn and told me to pack my bags for a nursing home. I did not yell, I did not beg. I simply picked up my worn-out bag, smiled at him, and asked a single question that would soon destroy his entire life. Son, did you check the name on the ticket? Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always comes with a heavy price. My name is Montgomery Hayes. I am 69 years old, and I am about to show you exactly what happens when you underestimate an old man. The dull, heavy thud of my leather suitcase hitting the damp morning grass echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. It popped open on impact, spilling my neatly folded shirts and an old framed photograph of my late wife Loretta onto the lawn. I stood on the sidewalk, the crisp morning air biting at my face, watching the front door of the house I had paid off decades ago. Standing on the porch was Bradley, my 35-year-old son-in-law. His face was flushed red, not with anger, but with a manic, unhinged euphoria. In his right hand, he wildly waved a small rectangular piece of paper. It was a printed lottery ticket. $90 million, Monty, he screamed, his voice cracking with pure greed. $90 million. The days of me living in this cramped, pathetic house are over, and your days of freeloading are done. Get your stuff, old man. Call a cab and check yourself into a nursing home. You are not my problem anymore. He marched down the steps, his expensive designer loafers stepping right over my scattered clothes. Bradley was a financial broker, a man who wore suits that cost more than my first car, yet he never seemed to have a dime to his name. He always acted like he was meant for the elite, a temporary visitor in our middle-class reality. Now, holding that piece of paper, he looked at me with absolute disgust, stripping away the fake politeness he had maintained for the last 10 years. "Do you hear me?" he sneered, pointing a finger directly at my chest. "I am a multimillionaire now. I am done pretending to respect you just because my wife feels sorry for you. For a decade, I have had to look at your tired face every morning. I have had to listen to your boring stories about the good old days. Well, this house is mine now. Jada and I are going to bulldoze this miserable shack and build a mansion. Or maybe we will just sell it for scrap. Either way, you do not belong here. You never did. You are just a broke old man taking up space." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made a neighbor across the street pause their morning walk and stare. "You should be thanking me," Bradley continued, adjusting his silk tie as if he were already addressing a crowd of reporters on television. "I let you stay here. I let you pretend you were the man of the house. But let us be real, Monty. You are a dinosaur. You belong in a sterile room playing bingo, not breathing the same air as a guy worth $90 million. So take your garbage and leave before I call the cops and have you removed for trespassing on my property." I looked at the house behind him. My house. The house I bought 40 years ago with sweat and calloused hands. I was a union electrician for 35 years. I spent 10 years in this very house paying the water bills, the electric bills, and the property taxes out of my hard-earned pension just so Bradley could keep up his illusion of being a successful broker. When the roof leaked 3 winters ago, it was my savings that fixed it. I did it for Jada, my daughter, the little girl I raised. I kept my mouth shut and paid for their groceries when Bradley blew his commission checks on flashy watches and expensive dinners to impress clients he never actually landed. I sacrificed my golden years so he could play pretend. But standing there on the lawn looking at the pure malice in his pale eyes, I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice to defend my pride or list the thousands of dollars I had poured into his fragile ego over the years. Instead, a deep, profound calm settled over me. I slowly bent down my old knees, aching slightly in the morning chill. I picked up the photograph of Loretta, dusted off the glass, and placed it gently back into my suitcase. I gathered my shirts, closed the worn-out zipper, and stood back up. I gripped the handle of my luggage and looked straight into Bradley's wild, arrogant eyes. I let a slow, quiet smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards. "Congratulations, Bradley," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. $90 million is a whole lot of money. It is truly life-changing. But before you start spending it, let me ask you one simple question. He stopped his gloating, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What?" he snapped. I tilted my head slightly. "Son, did you check the name on the ticket?" For a fraction of a second, I saw his confident posture falter. A flicker of confusion darted across his face. He looked down at the printed receipt in his hand, his eyes scanning the numbers, the date, the barcode. But his arrogance was a disease that had blinded him completely. He scoffed, his face twisting into a nasty smirk. "Nice try, old man. It is a bearer instrument. Whoever holds the ticket gets the gold. Now get off my grass." He turned on his heel, marched back up the steps, and slammed the heavy oak door so hard the front windows rattled. I stood alone on the sidewalk for a moment, listening to the finality of that slam. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my banking folder and tapped on the official state lottery application. The screen loaded, displaying my full legal name, Montgomery Hayes, my verified social security number, and my linked bank account. Right beneath it was a green banner confirming the winning numbers, and at the bottom a bright red security toggle that I had engaged 10 minutes before stepping outside. It read, "Physical ticket locked. Digital ID required for redemption." Bradley thought he held a golden ticket. He had stolen the paper receipt off the kitchen counter this morning while I was making coffee. He did not realize he was holding a worthless piece of paper that was about to drag him straight into a nightmare. The sky had been threatening a storm all morning, and the first cold drops of rain began to fall just as a sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. It was Jada, my daughter, the little girl I had raised, protected, and loved with every fiber of my being. She stepped out of the driver's side door, immediately holding her designer handbag over her head to shield her meticulously styled hair from the drizzle. She paused halfway up the walk, her high heels clicking to a halt when she saw me standing on the wet sidewalk. I was holding my battered suitcase, the rain beginning to soak through my heavy winter coat. I stood there in the pouring rain waiting. I waited for her to run to me. I waited for her to question why her father was standing outside like a stray dog. I waited for her to march up those porch steps and demand answers from the man who had just thrown my belongings onto the lawn. But the front door swung open before she could say a word. Bradley stepped out onto the porch, completely ignoring the rain. He practically sprinted down the concrete walkway and wrapped his arm possessively around Jada's waist. He leaned in close to her ear, his voice a frantic hiss of excitement. Even over the sound of the rain, I could hear him telling her about the $90 million. He shoved the printed lottery receipt into her hands, pointing at the numbers, then sweeping his arm toward the empty lot down the street. He was painting a rapid-fire picture of sprawling mansions, European sports cars, private jets, and endless shopping sprees. I watched her posture change. The initial confusion on her face melted away in an instant. It was replaced by a wide-eyed, greedy hunger that perfectly mirrored her husband's expression. She looked down at the slip of paper, her hands trembling with excitement, and then she looked at me. She did not rush over to embrace me. She did not apologize for Bradley's insane, disrespectful behavior. Instead, she retreated to the safety of the porch awning, standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who had just evicted me. "Dad," she started, her voice completely devoid of the warmth I had known for 32 years. "Bradley just told me everything. You have to understand things are changing for us now. We are about to be ultra-rich. We cannot have you living in the guest room anymore. We are going to have a certain image to maintain in this neighborhood, and frankly, we need the space to start planning our new estate." She crossed her arms, looking at me as if I were a stranger asking for spare change. "Bradley says he knows a very nice private nursing home just outside the city limits." She continued, her tone chillingly casual. "We will pay for your first month. It just makes more sense for you to be around people your own age instead of crowding us here. You understand, right?" Looking at her standing there in her expensive clothes bought on credit, I hardly recognized the woman she had become. Jada used to be fiercely independent. She worked her way through college proud and determined to carve out her own path in the world. She used to value hard work and integrity above all else. But 10 years of marriage to a man obsessed with status had slowly poisoned her soul. Bradley had infected her with his delusion of grandeur. He convinced her that appearance was everything, that massive debt was just a stepping stone to wealth, and that real success meant leaving behind anyone who did not fit their new high-class aesthetic. She had traded her brilliant, hard-working spirit for the shallow pursuit of a luxury lifestyle they could never actually afford. Her values had been entirely eclipsed by the desperate need to look rich on social media. Until today, I had always held out hope that the kind, grounded girl I raised was still in there somewhere. Now, hearing her dismiss me so easily, I knew that girl was gone. The pain in my chest was sharp, like a physical blow to the ribs. It was one thing for a greedy, arrogant son-in-law to toss me aside. I expected nothing less from Bradley. But it was an entirely different kind of agony to hear my own flesh and blood tell me I was no longer fit for her new reality. I could have argued. I could have pulled out my smartphone and showed her the truth right then and there. I could have revealed the digital lock on the ticket and watched her drop to her knees in the mud begging for forgiveness when she realized her father was the actual multi-millionaire. But I did not. I kept my mouth firmly shut. If the mere illusion of money was all it took for her to discard me like yesterday's trash, then she had already made her choice. She had shown me exactly who she was when the chips were down. I nodded slowly, the rain dripping from the brim of my hat. "I understand, Jada," I said, my voice steady and surprisingly calm. "I hope you get everything you have ever wanted." I turned my back on them and stepped off the curb, raising my hand to wave down a passing city taxi. The yellow cab splashed through a puddle and ground to a halt beside me. I opened the door, threw my wet suitcase into the back seat, and slid in. "Where to?" the driver asked, looking at me through the rearview mirror. "Just drive downtown," I replied. As the taxi pulled away, leaving the house I had built and paid for in the rearview mirror, I did not look back. I did not shed a single tear. My mourning period for the daughter I once knew was officially over. There was no room for sorrow anymore, only the cold, precise execution of consequence. I dried my hands on my slacks and unlocked my phone. I navigated past my banking applications and opened a hidden folder secured by a biometric lock. I typed in a complex 12-character password. A specialized security application launched, bringing up a dark screen that quickly populated with a grid of high-definition video feeds. As a union electrician with decades of experience, my skills went far beyond simply rewiring a kitchen or fixing a breaker box. 2 years ago, when Bradley started acting increasingly shady with the household finances and bringing strange people around, I spent an entire weekend upgrading our home security. I ran discrete wiring and installed microscopic high-resolution cameras in the living room, the kitchen, the main hallway, and Bradley's home office. When Bradley noticed a glitch in the old alarm panel, I told him a power surge from a thunderstorm had fried the main control board and that the system was permanently broken. He was too lazy to investigate and far too cheap to hire a professional to fix it, so he completely believed me. Now, sitting in the quiet hum of the taxi's back seat, I tapped the screen and maximized the living room camera feed. The audio crackled to life, crystal clear. I watched live as Bradley and Jada ran back inside the house, dripping wet but completely oblivious to the rain. They were jumping up and down in the center of the living room I had furnished, hugging each other and screaming in celebration over their fake lottery win. "We did it!" Bradley shouted, spinning Jada around. "We finally got rid of the old man. The house is ours. The money is ours." I watched them celebrate their cruel victory, a tight, merciless smile touching the corners of my mouth. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded an old burden and stepped into a life of unlimited luxury. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed me a front row seat to their impending destruction. The cameras were rolling, the digital ticket was locked, and the trap was perfectly set. Let the games begin. The taxi dropped me off at a cheap roadside motel on the industrial outskirts of town. The flickering neon sign buzzed against the gray afternoon sky, and the narrow room smelled faintly of stale smoke and heavy bleach. I placed my damp suitcase on the sagging mattress and took a seat in the only armchair available, a faded floral piece pushed into the corner. I pulled out my smartphone and stared at the dark screen for a moment. Let me explain something very crucial about the modern state lottery system that my incredibly arrogant son-in-law completely failed to understand. Gone are the days when a simple piece of paper was your only proof of holding a jackpot. The slip of paper Bradley stole from the kitchen counter this morning was nothing more than a printed transaction receipt. I purchased that specific ticket through the official identity-verified state lottery application on my phone. My social security number, my biometric facial recognition, and my highly secure banking details are all permanently bound to those winning numbers in the state database. The physical paper has a barcode, yes, but without the digital authorization code generated exclusively from my specific account, it is completely useless. It is nothing more than expensive scrap paper. Bradley thought he was holding the golden ticket to a life of unlimited luxury. In reality, he was holding a fast pass to his own absolute ruin. I unlocked my phone and brought up the live feed from the hidden cameras I had wired inside my house. Bradley and Jada were in the kitchen now, popping open a bottle of expensive vintage champagne they had been saving in the back of the pantry for a special anniversary. Bradley was pacing the hardwood floor, talking animatedly on his cell phone, his face flushed with manic power. He already had his laptop open on the kitchen island, his fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. Through the high-definition audio feed, I heard him dictating credit card numbers to a luxury car dealership across town. He was putting down a massive $50,000 non-refundable deposit on a custom-built Porsche. I watched in cold silence as he pulled a sleek black credit card from his leather wallet to read off the 3-digit security code. It was a secondary emergency card tied directly to my primary retirement account. I had given it to Jada 5 years ago strictly for household emergencies, medical copays, or unexpected repairs. Bradley had commandeered it the moment his own credit scores tanked, but he never realized a very important detail. I maintained full administrative control over the main account. He thought he was completely untouchable now. He figured that since he had $90 million coming his way in a matter of weeks, a $50,000 charge was just a microscopic drop in the bucket. He was acting like royalty, ordering custom leather interiors, upgraded performance engines, and specialized rims, laughing loudly with the salesman on the other end of the line. Jada stood right next to him, sipping champagne and cheering him on, her eyes practically glazed over with the blinding illusion of instant wealth. They were celebrating a phantom fortune, eagerly spending money they did not possess and flagrantly using a credit line they did not own. My phone vibrated violently in my hand with an automated fraud alert from my bank. A $50,000 charge from a luxury automotive dealer was attempting to process pending my immediate approval. I stared at the notification banner on my screen. Decades ago, as my beautiful wife Loretta lay in her hospital bed during her final painful days, I held her fragile hand and made her a solemn vow. I promised her I would always protect our family and fiercely guard the financial foundation we had built together through decades of calloused hands and hard labor. That unwavering promise was the exact reason I set up dual-factor authentication, strict spending limits, and absolute security protocols on every single account attached to my name. I protected our assets from online scammers, from terrible investments, and most importantly, from the reckless, insatiable greed of the man who had married our daughter. Any normal person in my position would have instantly tapped the decline button on that fraud alert. I could have frozen the card, locked the entire account, and shut down his ridiculous Porsche purchase in 3 seconds flat. But I did not. I tapped approve. I let the $50,000 transaction go completely through the banking network. I wanted the financial trap to snap shut around his ankles nice and tight. I closed the banking application and opened my contacts list, tapping the number for Evelyn Wright. Evelyn was a legal powerhouse. She was a brilliant African-American attorney who had built her formidable reputation by absolutely destroying corporate fraudsters, predatory opportunists, and arrogant executives in the courtroom. She was meticulous, highly connected, and completely ruthless when it came to protecting her clients and dismantling their enemies. She answered on the second ring. "Monty," she said, her voice sharp, professional, and commanding. "Tell me you are calling with good news today." I smiled, watching Bradley pour another overflowing glass of champagne on the live camera feed. "Evelyn, I need you to initiate a deep financial freeze protocol across all my secondary assets, but leave the main trapdoors wide open. My son-in-law just took the bait hook, line, and sinker. I calmly explained the entire morning to her, detailing the stolen lottery receipt, the biometric lock on the digital application, my eviction from my own property, and the authorized $50,000 car deposit he just made. Evelyn listened in complete silence until I finished my report. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted from professional curiosity to predatory anticipation. "Monty," she said, the sound of her keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. "I was already monitoring the state lottery database for any unauthorized inquiries linked to your social security number. You are not going to believe what your son-in-law just did 20 minutes ago. He did not just stop at buying the luxury car." "What did he do?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. Evelyn let out a low, humorless laugh that sent a chill through the room. "He just walked into the downtown office of a company called Apex Financial. They are not a legitimate banking institution, Monty. They are a black market lending syndicate operating behind a corporate front. They specialize in offering massive unregulated cash advances to lottery winners during the mandatory 30-day payout waiting period, and they charge extortionate mob-level interest rates for the privilege. He presented your physical ticket receipt as collateral to the loan officers. He just signed a binding contract for a $5 million instant cash advance. He wants to live like a billionaire immediately. But Monty, if the State Lottery Commission does not pay out to that specific syndicate in exactly 30 days, the default clauses in that contract are catastrophic. They will legally seize everything he owns, and the people backing that money do not play by the rules of the court. They will strip him down to his bones." I looked back at the live camera feed on my screen. Bradley was toasting to the camera, dancing around my kitchen with Jada in his arms. He had just borrowed $5 million from ruthless criminals using a worthless piece of paper. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, listening to Evelyn's words echo in the small, dimly lit room. $5 million. Bradley had actually walked into a black market syndicate and sold his soul for $5 million of phantom cash. He signed a contract with Apex Financial that carried an interest rate so astronomically high it would bankrupt a small nation. But in his feverish, greed-fueled mind, the math was incredibly simple. He believed he was exactly 30 days away from a $90 million payout. To him, a predatory interest rate from the criminal underworld was just a tiny inconvenience, a small fee to pay to fast-track his entrance into the Billionaire Boys Club. He was absolutely convinced that when the State Lottery Commission finally released the funds, he would casually write a check, pay off the underworld lenders, and ride off into the sunset. He did not care about the fine print. He did not care about the default clauses. He only cared about the instant gratification of a multi-million-dollar wire transfer hitting his bank account so he could start playing king of the world. With $5 million of dangerous money suddenly at his disposal, Bradley completely lost his mind. I watched him through the hidden security cameras over the next 48 hours as he went on a spending spree that defied all human logic. He was living like a man with a bottomless wallet. Heavy cardboard boxes from high-end designer boutiques began piling up in the narrow hallway. He hired a private 5-star catering company to serve him and Jada a lavish multi-course steak and lobster dinner right in our modest aging kitchen. He even had a massive, absurdly expensive crystal chandelier delivered, forcing the frustrated delivery men to leave it in the center of the living room because the ceiling of my house was simply not structurally designed to hold that kind of weight. But his newfound wealth did not just buy him luxury goods. It bought him the audacity to be as cruel and vindictive as he had always secretly wanted to be. I watched the exterior porch camera as our longtime neighbor, Mr. Henderson, walked over to offer his usual friendly morning greeting. Mr. Henderson was a retired postal worker who had lived next door for 30 years, a good, decent man. Bradley stood on the porch, an unlit cigar in one hand and a glass of expensive scotch in the other, and openly mocked the man to his face. He laughed at Mr. Henderson's 10-year-old sedan parked in the driveway and loudly announced that he was going to buy the entire block, just to bulldoze it and build a massive concrete privacy wall to keep the peasants out. Mr. Henderson walked away shaking his head in quiet dignity, while Bradley cackled like a cartoon villain. 10 minutes later, Hector, the hard-working landscaping guy who had meticulously mowed my lawn for 5 years, pulled up in his beaten-up truck. Bradley strutted down the driveway, threw a crumpled $100 bill directly at Hector's chest, and fired him on the spot. He yelled that he was hiring a premium botanical architectural firm from the city and did not want Hector's rusty lawnmower anywhere near his new estate. He was burning bridges with the terrifying speed of a man who thought money made him an immortal god. This vile behavior was not a sudden transformation. It was the absolute unmasking of the man Bradley had always been. He grew up comfortably middle class but harbored a desperate pathological obsession with high society. He wanted the exclusive country club memberships and the tailored Italian suits, but he possessed absolutely zero of the grit or work ethic required to actually earn them. He was a mediocre financial broker who barely scraped by on his base salary, constantly trying to fake it until he made it. For 10 years, he harbored a deep, simmering resentment toward me. He hated my calm demeanor. He hated that I, a black man who wore steel-toed boots and a heavy tool belt every day, had paid off a house and built a rock-solid retirement, while he, with his fancy business degree, was perpetually drowning in credit card debt. My quiet stability was a constant, glaring mirror reflecting his own profound failures. Evelyn called me again later that evening, her tone laced with professional urgency and legal outrage. "Monty, we have enough right now to end this," she said firmly. "He is committing massive financial fraud. He is spending money secured against a lottery ticket he does not legally own. Give me the green light, and I will call the police precinct right now. I can have a squad car at your house in 10 minutes to arrest him for grand larceny and wire fraud. We can shut this entire circus down tonight." I stared at the motel wall, listening to the buzzing neon sign outside my window. I thought about the way he threw my worn-out suitcase on the lawn. I thought about Jada standing on the porch, treating me like a disposable stray dog. A simple arrest was too easy. It was too clean. I wanted him to feel the exact moment his fake empire crumbled. "No, Evelyn," I replied, my voice steady and unyielding. "Do not call the police. Do not notify the lottery commission. I want absolute silence on our end. Let him spend that dirty money. Let him make his arrogant promises to the criminal underworld. The higher he climbs on this fragile ladder of lies, the harder he is going to hit the concrete when I pull it out from under him. Let him dig his hole a little deeper." There was a heavy pause on the line before Evelyn spoke again, her voice dropping an octave, sounding more serious than I had ever heard her. "If that is how you want to play it, Monty, then you need to see exactly how deep this hole actually goes. I just sent an encrypted file to your email. I used a back-channel contact to pull a shadow copy of the loan contract Bradley signed with Apex Financial today. You need to look at page 4. I opened my email application and downloaded the heavily encrypted document. I scrolled past the standard loan terms, the extortionate interest rates, and the terrifying default penalties. When I reached page 4, my blood ran absolutely cold. Bradley had not just used the stolen lottery receipt as collateral for the $5 million loan. He knew the syndicate required hard, tangible assets to secure that kind of immediate, unregulated cash. Staring back at me on the glowing screen of my phone was a scanned copy of the property deed to my house. And right there on the bottom dotted line, authorizing the property to be used as collateral in the event of a lottery payout default, was my signature. It was a clumsy, desperate forgery of my handwriting, but it was there. Bradley had not just evicted me. He had illegally signed away the home I built, handing the keys directly to a ruthless criminal syndicate. The next afternoon, sitting in the damp, depressing motel room, my phone chimed loudly with a new text message. I opened the notification and found a picture of a massive, ostentatious ice sculpture shaped like a dollar sign being carried into my house by 2 men in uniform. Beneath the image was a block of text from Bradley. "Having a little celebration tonight to ring in the new tax bracket," the message read. "The luxury catering company I hired is short-staffed on servers. If you want to make a quick $100 to pay for your cheap motel room and buy a hot meal, put on a white button-down and come serve drinks. Do not be late." It was a blatant, calculated insult. He wanted to parade his new stolen wealth in front of me and humiliate me in my own home among his peers. A normal man would have completely ignored the message, blocked the number, and let his anger simmer. But I was not a normal man, and I desperately needed a solid, unsuspicious excuse to get back inside that house. I replied with a simple confirmation that I would be there at 7. I walked down the street to a local thrift store, purchased a cheap white dress shirt, a pair of black slacks, and a basic black bow tie. I ironed the clothes carefully, preparing myself to play the precise role of the subservient, defeated old man he expected to see. When I arrived at my own address that evening, the street was entirely lined with luxury vehicles. Thumping bass vibrated violently through the front windows I had paid to replace just last spring. I walked through the front door and was immediately hit by the suffocating stench of expensive cigars and heavy, cheap perfume. The living room was packed shoulder to shoulder with Bradley's slimy broker friends, sycophantic acquaintances and strangers, eager to latch onto a newly minted millionaire. I walked directly into the kitchen, grabbed a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes from a confused catering manager, and walked back out into the dense crowd. Bradley spotted me almost immediately. He was wearing a ridiculous velvet smoking jacket, holding court in the very center of the room with a glass of dark red wine in his hand. He pointed a manicured finger right at my face and laughed loudly, a sound that cut right through the music. "Look, everyone, the new help has finally arrived," he shouted, making sure every eye in the room turned toward me. "Make sure you tip him well, folks. He really needs the charity." The crowd chuckled nervously, some looking away in embarrassment, others smirking. I kept my face entirely blank, walking over to offer him a fresh drink. As I extended the silver tray toward him, Bradley looked me dead in the eye, tilted his glass of dark red wine, and deliberately poured the entire contents straight down the front of my crisp white shirt and onto my polished black shoes. The dark liquid splattered aggressively across the floorboards, staining the cuffs of my pants. "Oh, how incredibly clumsy of me," Bradley mocked, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "You better get down there and clean that up right now, Monty. We cannot have the floor looking like a dump for my high-class guests. Use your cloth napkin. Get to it." The entire room went dead silent. Dozens of eyes burned into my back. I looked past Bradley's smug face and saw Jada standing by the bottom of the staircase. She was wearing a brand new, excessively tight sequined gown, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She saw the dark wine covering my shoes. She saw her husband publicly and maliciously humiliating her own father. And she did absolutely nothing to stop it. She did not yell. She did not intervene. She just took a slow sip of her drink, turned her back on me, and walked up the stairs. I slowly dropped to my knees and began to wipe the spilled wine with my thin white cloth napkin. My old joints ached from the hard surface, but the physical discomfort was absolutely nothing compared to the profound irony of the moment. I was scrubbing the very same Brazilian cherry hardwood floor that I had installed with my own two hands exactly 5 years ago. I had spent 2 entire months of my retirement savings and 3 weeks of grueling, back-breaking labor to tear up the rotted carpet and lay down these beautiful planks. I did it just so Jada could have the elegant living room she had always dreamed of hosting holidays in. I hammered every single nail and sealed every board with love. Now I was kneeling on that exact floor, wiping up a mess made by a greedy parasite, while the daughter I sacrificed everything for watched my degradation in absolute silence. I meticulously finished wiping the floor, stood up slowly, and placed the soaked red-stained napkin onto my tray without a single word of protest. Bradley smirked, completely satisfied with his display of dominance, and turned back to his sycophant friends to brag loudly about his upcoming yacht purchase. I faded seamlessly into the background, silently picking up empty glasses, clearing abandoned plates, and playing the invisible servant. I waited patiently for the next 2 hours as the alcohol flowed freely. The music grew significantly louder, and the crowd lost its inhibitions. By 10 o'clock, the guests were heavily intoxicated, and Bradley was busy doing tequila shots with a group of men in the backyard. The interior of the house was loud and chaotic, which provided the absolute perfect cover. I deposited my tray in the kitchen, slipped past the busy caterers, and moved silently down the darkened hallway toward Bradley's locked home office. I pulled a small, specialized master key from my pocket, unlocked the solid wooden door, and slipped inside, locking the deadbolt securely behind me. The room was dark, illuminated only by the pulsing standby light of his high-end desktop computer. I sat in his leather ergonomic chair, moved the mouse, and woke up the machine. Knowing Bradley was entirely too vain to use a complex security password, I typed in the name of his favorite luxury watch brand. The desktop immediately unlocked, giving me full access to his entire digital life. I reached into my trousers and pulled out a high-speed encrypted solid-state drive provided directly by Evelyn's tech specialist. I plugged the drive into the back of the computer and executed a silent custom cloning software designed to mirror his entire hard drive in minutes. It grabbed his financial spreadsheets, his hidden image folders, and his local email clients. The green progress bar crept rapidly across the screen, a silent countdown to his absolute impending ruin. While the software did its heavy lifting, I manually opened his messaging application, which he had carelessly left logged in on the desktop. I fully expected to find more evidence of his fraudulent loan documents with Apex Financial. Instead, a specific highly active chat thread pinned to the very top of his inbox caught my eye. The contact name simply read, Monica. I clicked on the thread and began scrolling through months of highly explicit, deeply romantic messages. It was not a business contact at all. It was a white woman, someone he had clearly been seeing behind my daughter's back for over a year. Bradley was not just planning to steal my money and build a massive mansion with Jada. In message after message, he was explicitly telling this mysterious Monica that as soon as the $90 million wire transfer officially cleared, he was going to serve his annoying wife with divorce papers, drain the joint bank accounts completely, and flee to a luxury villa in Monaco with her. I watched the cloning process hit 100% safely, securing the digital evidence of a brutal betrayal that would soon shatter Jada's entire world. The morning after his vulgar celebration, Bradley wasted no time executing the next phase of his pathetic double life. With $5 million of dangerous syndicate money burning a hole in his pocket, he immediately booked Jada a first-class ticket to Paris for a spontaneous luxury shopping spree. I watched her social media accounts flood with pictures of high-end boutiques, expensive pastries, and designer bags in front of the Eiffel Tower. She was living her absolute best life, entirely oblivious to the reality waiting for her back home. The moment her flight crossed the Atlantic, Bradley did not invite his broker friends over. Instead, a sleek white convertible pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a tall blonde woman wearing a skin-tight designer dress and oversized sunglasses. This was Monica. I recognized her instantly from the hidden digital files I had cloned from his computer the night before. She strutted up the front walk like she already owned the property, her stilettos clicking sharply against the concrete. Bradley swung the front door open, pulling her inside with a desperate, aggressive hunger. He was not just cheating on my daughter, he was actively bringing his mistress into the very house I had paid for, parading her around the space my hard work had maintained. I sat in the dim light of my motel room, staring at the live feed from the hidden camera positioned perfectly above the living room mantel. The high-definition audio caught every single word, every breathless whisper. Bradley and Monica did not even make it up the stairs to the master bedroom. They collapsed right there in the center of the living room, tearing at each other's clothes with a sloppy, unhinged desperation. When they finally paused to catch their breath, Monica propped herself up on her elbows and ran a manicured hand through Bradley's hair. She looked around the living room with a sneer of pure disdain, judging the home I had built. "You promised me you would be done with her by now, Brad," Monica whined, her voice dripping with calculated manipulation. "I am so tired of sneaking around this basic suburban dump. When do I get to be the only woman in your life?" Bradley chuckled, kissing her neck, entirely intoxicated by his own fake success. "Be patient, baby," he whispered back. "We just have to wait out the mandatory 30-day payout window for the lottery commission to clear the $90 million wire transfer. As soon as that money officially hits my private offshore account, I am serving Jada with divorce papers. She will not get a single dime. I already have a ruthless lawyer drafting an airtight separation agreement. We are going to sell this pathetic house, take the cash, and catch a private flight straight to Monaco just like we planned. You will never have to look at this place or my annoying wife ever again." Monica smiled a sharp, predatory grin and pulled him back down. They were casually discussing the complete destruction of my daughter's life, while basking in the glow of a fortune they would never actually touch. As I watched them intertwine on the screen, a hot spike of revulsion flared in my chest. They were lying on a custom, genuine leather sectional sofa. That piece of furniture was not bought with Bradley's non-existent commission checks. I purchased that exact sofa 3 years ago as a 5th wedding anniversary gift for Jada. It cost me 3 months of strict budgeting, skipping my own dental appointments and eating canned soup, just so my daughter could have a beautiful, comfortable centerpiece for her home. I had wanted to give them something solid, something that would last them for years. I had assembled it myself, making sure it was perfect. Now it was just another stage for Bradley to completely defile our family. He was physically dirtying the very sacrifices I had made to keep his marriage afloat. I did not look away from the screen. I engaged the advanced recording software on my secure application, capturing the entire scene in crisp, undeniable high-definition video and audio. Every vulgar promise, every admission of his impending divorce, and every clear shot of Monica's face was permanently logged into an encrypted cloud server. A lesser man might have immediately fired that video file off to Jada's phone, eager to shatter her Parisian shopping spree and drag her back to reality. I could have ruined her vacation and exposed her husband right then and there, but I lowered my finger from the send button. Jada had looked me dead in the eye yesterday and told me I belonged in a nursing home just so she could maintain her new, ultra-rich image. She had stood by while her husband threw my belongings onto the wet grass. She had chosen money and status over the father who loved her unconditionally. Sending her the video now would be a mercy she had not earned. She needed to taste the absolute bitterness of her choices. She needed to understand the profound consequences of abandoning her loyalty for the illusion of wealth. I locked the files securely in a digital vault. I would drop this nuclear bomb precisely when it would inflict the maximum amount of damage, when she had absolutely nowhere else to run. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Evelyn, pulling me from my thoughts. "Monty," she said, her voice tight with professional anticipation. "The first weekly interest payment on Bradley's $5 million loan from Apex Financial is officially due tomorrow at noon. The syndicate requires a massive liquid cash transfer, and from what my forensic accountants can see, Bradley has already completely drained his available funds. He blew through the cash on the Porsche deposit, the lavish catering, the luxury watches, and funding Jada's extravagant European trip. He is completely tapped out." Right on cue, the camera feed showed Bradley's cell phone ringing aggressively on the coffee table. He picked it up, and the color instantly drained from his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. He shoved Monica off of him and began pacing the room, running a hand over his face in sheer panic. The underworld lenders were calling to collect, and they did not care about his excuses. As soon as the call ended, he immediately dialed Jada. I heard her pick up from across the world, music playing happily in the background. "Jada, you need to cut the trip short and fly back tonight," he demanded, his voice cracking with rising terror. "Stop asking questions and just get on a plane. I need you to find your father immediately. We need him to legally sign over his equity share of the house deed right now, or this entire deal falls apart." Jada did not even bother to knock properly. The flimsy motel door rattled under her aggressive, demanding pounding the very next morning. When I opened it, she pushed past me without a single word of greeting or concern. She was still wearing the same high-end designer clothes from her Parisian shopping spree, looking completely absurd and entirely out of place inside my bleak, smoke-stained room. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask if I had eaten a hot meal or if I had a safe, comfortable place to sleep after being thrown out of my own home. Instead, she reached into her oversized luxury handbag and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope. She tossed it onto the wobbly wooden table next to my bed with a heavy, insulting thud. $10,000 in crisp, newly printed $100 bills spilled out slightly from the open flap. It was a bribe, plain and simple. An insulting, arrogant payoff from my own flesh and blood to officially erase me from the property records of the very home I had built for her. "Here is your nursing home fund, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with an ugly practiced superiority that she had definitely learned from her husband. She pulled a thick stack of legal documents from her bag and slapped them down right next to the scattered cash. "Bradley needs you to sign these property transfer papers immediately. We are finalizing the architectural plans today, and he needs total legal clearance to demolish the old house and break ground on the new mansion. The city zoning board requires your signature since you are still technically listed as a co-owner on the original deed. Just sign the dotted line and take the cash. It is more money than you have ever held at one time anyway, so you should be thanking us for the generosity." I looked at the cash, then at the glossy legal documents, and finally up at the cold, entitled face of my daughter. She was so thoroughly blinded by her husband's fake wealth that she was actively aiding him in stealing her childhood home. I leaned against the peeling motel wall, folding my arms tightly across my chest. I looked her dead in the eye and asked a single piercing question. "Are you absolutely sure he is building that mansion for you, Jada?" The color drained from her face for a split second before a dark, highly defensive rage completely consumed her features. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice echoing loudly in the cramped room. "You are just jealous. You have always been terribly jealous of Bradley. He is a financial genius who is about to be worth $90 million, and you are just a bitter retired electrician living in a roach-infested roadside motel. You absolutely hate that he provides a luxurious life for me that you could never afford. You are pathetic, Dad. You would rather sabotage your own daughter's happiness and try to plant seeds of doubt in my marriage than admit that my husband is a much better man than you will ever be." She stood there breathing heavily, hurling decades of fabricated resentment at me just to defend a man who was actively planning to discard her. Her cruel words echoed off the damp walls, but they did not break me. They only served to remind me of the profound, back-breaking sacrifices I had made that she had entirely forgotten. I remembered coming home at 3 a.m. with my hands blistered and my joints aching with exhaustion. For 4 solid years, I worked 3 back-to-back shifts at the electrical plant. I skipped every vacation, every holiday, and every personal luxury just to pay her expensive university tuition in full so she would never have to take out a single student loan. And what did she do with that massive sacrifice? She dropped out in her junior year the exact moment she met Bradley, convinced that marrying a flashy broker was a much easier path to success than actually earning a degree. I did not defend my honor. I did not remind her of the tuition money or the decade of household bills I paid to keep her ungrateful husband afloat. I simply walked over to the wobbly table, picked up the cheap plastic pen sitting next to the cash, and leaned over the documents. I flipped directly to the last page. I did not need to read the fine print because I already knew exactly what this document represented. It was not a permit to build a mansion. It was a desperate retroactive attempt by Bradley to secure the fraudulent collateral he had already promised to the criminal syndicate. If I did not sign this document today, the Apex financial loan officers would quickly realize his previous signature on the deed was forged, and they would break his legs before the sun went down. By signing this paper, I was officially handing Bradley the legal rope he needed to hang himself. I signed my name with a steady, deliberate hand. I pushed the papers toward her and left the $10,000 sitting completely untouched on the table. "Take your money," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You are going to need every single penny of it very soon." Jada snatched the signed documents off the table, shot me one last look of absolute disgust, and stormed out of the motel room. She slammed the door behind her, completely unaware that she had just sealed her own fate. I walked over to the window and watched her stomp across the cracked asphalt parking lot toward her waiting luxury rideshare vehicle. As she reached for the car door, I pulled out my phone and opened my secure banking application. I navigated straight to the secondary emergency credit card I had originally authorized for her, the exact same card Bradley had been using to fund his insane spending spree and her lavish Parisian vacation. With one simple tap, I reported the card as permanently lost and stolen. The digital connection was severed instantly. Every single line of credit they had was officially cut off. Out in the parking lot, I watched Jada argue aggressively with the rideshare driver. Through the cracked window, I could hear the driver politely explaining that her payment method had been completely declined. She frantically pulled out her phone, dialing the bank, her confident posture suddenly collapsing into sheer panic as the automated voice delivered the bad news. Bradley had spent all of the syndicate cash, and now the limitless credit card they had been relying on to survive the day was nothing more than useless plastic. The financial oxygen supply was entirely shut off. Back at the house, the atmosphere of celebration had completely evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, frantic panic. I watched through the hidden office camera as Bradley slammed his fist onto his mahogany desk with such force that his computer monitor violently shook. His face was a mask of pure terror and uncontrollable rage. He had just attempted to initiate the massive wire transfer to Apex Financial to cover the first week of interest on his $5 million underworld loan, but the transaction was instantly blocked. The secondary credit card I had just reported stolen was completely dead. Bradley had the phone pressed hard against his ear, screaming obscenities at a poor bank customer service representative. He was demanding they unfreeze the account, shouting at the top of his lungs that he was a multi-millionaire, and threatening to sue the entire institution into bankruptcy. But the representative could do absolutely nothing. The account was flagged for severe fraud, and only the primary account holder, which was me, could authorize its release. Bradley violently hurled his expensive smartphone across the room, shattering the screen into dozens of pieces against the drywall. The cold, hard reality of his situation was finally setting in. He had zero liquid cash available, and the Apex Syndicate did not accept apologies, excuses, or delayed payments. The clock had officially run out and the wolves were coming to the door. The consequences of missing a payment to a criminal syndicate are never delayed. It happened exactly at dusk, just as the streetlights began to flicker on. The exterior security cameras captured a sleek, unmarked black SUV rolling slowly past the house, its headlights completely turned off. Two massive men wearing dark hoodies stepped out of the vehicle, moving with terrifying silent precision. They did not knock. They did not leave a polite warning note in the mailbox. Instead, they hurled 2 large glass jars filled with thick blood-red paint directly at the front of the house. The glass shattered violently, splattering the bright red liquid across the pristine white siding, the living room windows, and the heavy oak front door. Before stepping back into the vehicle, one of the men casually walked up the porch steps, pulled out a massive serrated hunting knife, and drove it deep into the center of the wooden door. He pinned a blank piece of black paper to the wood. It was a silent, unmistakable death threat from the criminal underworld. Inside the house, the noise was absolutely deafening. Bradley jumped so hard he knocked over an expensive floor lamp, sending it crashing to the ground. He crawled on his hands and knees toward the window, peeking through the blinds like a terrified, trapped rat. Jada ran frantically down the stairs, her face pale with shock at the sound of the shattering glass. She took one look at the red paint dripping down the front windows like fresh blood and began to hyperventilate. She turned to Bradley, who was currently cowering on the hardwood floor, and asked a simple, incredibly logical question. "Bradley, what is going on out there? Why is our card declining everywhere I go, and who just attacked our house? Are we completely out of money?" That single, totally reasonable question triggered an explosive, violent reaction. Bradley leapt up from the floor, his face contorted with a wild, cornered animal fury. Without a single second of hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped Jada hard across the face. The sharp, brutal crack echoed clearly through the living room audio feed. Jada stumbled backward, clutching her reddened cheek, tears instantly welling in her eyes. She looked at the man she had abandoned her own father for, completely stunned by his sudden, vicious brutality. I watched the screen from the quiet safety of my motel room, my fists clenching so hard my knuckles turned a stark white. It took every ounce of my willpower not to drive over there, kick that door open, and break his jaw. But I knew I had to remain entirely disciplined. I had to let the trap finish its devastating work. This pathetic display of violence was the ultimate unmasking of Bradley's true nature. He was fundamentally a coward of the highest order. For his entire adult life, he projected a fake aura of dominant alpha male success, masking a deep, incredibly fragile insecurity. Whenever he faced actual pressure, whenever the terrifying consequences of his own reckless actions finally caught up to him, he folded instantly. He lashed out at the weak and bowed down to the strong. It was the exact opposite of the quiet, enduring resilience I had practiced my entire life. When I faced crippling medical debt during my late wife's illness, I did not scream, panic, or strike anyone. I picked up double shifts at the electrical plant, swallowed my pride, and worked through the agonizing pain in total silence. True manhood is maintaining absolute composure and protecting your family when the world is burning around you. Bradley, on the other hand, was nothing more than a fragile paper tiger catching fire. Breathing heavily, Bradley stood over Jada, pointing a shaking, aggressive finger directly at her face. "Do not ever question my finances again," he hissed desperately, trying to regain his false sense of absolute authority. "We are about to be worth $90 million in a matter of weeks. Do you understand what that means? Jada, it means people are insanely jealous of us. That is exactly what happened outside. It is just some jealous, pathetic neighborhood thugs who found out about the winning ticket. They are trying to intimidate us. They want to scare us out of our massive wealth." He reached down and forcefully grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet without a shred of gentleness. "The bank just put a temporary security freeze on the cards because I was making large luxury purchases too quickly," he lied smoothly, his eyes darting nervously toward the blood-red paint on the front door. "I will have my private wealth manager sort it out first thing in the morning. But right now, we need to fiercely protect our assets. I want you to call your boss right now and quit your job permanently. Tell them you are done working like a peasant. I need you here inside this house watching the property 24 hours a day until the lottery payout officially clears. You are not leaving this house until I say so." Jada, still trembling and holding her stinging cheek, simply nodded in submission. She was too terrified, too confused, and too deeply manipulated to see the glaring, massive holes in his ridiculous story. She blindly agreed to become a prisoner in her own home, guarding a phantom fortune that did not even exist. But Bradley had an even bigger, much more explosive problem brewing in the background. His secret mistress, Monica, was growing extremely impatient. She had been texting him relentlessly all morning, demanding the extravagant gifts and immediate financial commitments he had boldly promised her during their illicit encounters. She threatened to walk away entirely if he did not prove his newfound wealth immediately. Desperate to keep his Monaco escape plan alive and to stroke his own massive ego, Bradley made his most foolish and insulting move yet. He went into his hidden wall safe in the office and scraped together the absolute last bundles of physical cash he possessed. It was a meager $20,000 he had kept strictly hidden from the Apex loan officers. I watched the surveillance footage from his office as he packed the cash into a leather briefcase. Later that afternoon, through the advanced tracking software I had installed on his cloned devices, I meticulously monitored his purchase history. He drove straight to a high-end exclusive jewelry district downtown. With his last remaining dollars, he purchased a breathtaking, flawless 2-carat real diamond ring for Monica to keep her fully invested in their twisted fantasy. Then, knowing he had to pacify his traumatized wife after the violent altercation, he stopped at a cheap discount jeweler in a strip mall on his way back. He spent exactly $200 on a fake cubic zirconia ring meticulously plated to look like genuine white gold. He was actively planning to present the cheap piece of glass to Jada as a grand romantic gesture, a fake promise of their luxurious future together. He had absolutely no idea that I was tracking every single receipt, every single transaction, and that this fake ring was about to publicly destroy his fragile marriage in the most humiliating way imaginable. The very next afternoon, Jada stood in front of her hallway mirror admiring the massive, sparkling stone on her finger. Bradley had presented it to her over a hastily arranged breakfast, delivering a completely fabricated apology and a smooth practiced lie about how this ring was just a small down payment on their glittering future. Desperate to believe the illusion and desperate to forget the sharp sting of his hand across her face from the night before, Jada swallowed the lie without a single question. She slipped on a brand new designer dress she had bought during her reckless Parisian shopping spree, draped a silk scarf over her shoulders, and completely ignored Bradley's previous demand to stay locked inside the house. She had a massive point to prove, using her husband's newly claimed $90 million net worth. As aggressive social leverage, she had managed to secure an exclusive invitation to a high society afternoon tea party hosted by the city's most elite country club wives. She walked into that opulent sunlit ballroom like a conquering queen, her chin held exceptionally high, making absolutely sure the oversized ring caught the bright light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. She mingled with women who wore generational wealth, sipping artisanal tea and loudly steering every single conversation toward her new diamond. She spent the first hour floating on a cloud of unearned arrogance, loudly bragging about the upcoming mansion build and the luxury European cars they were supposedly importing. But high society circles are viciously protective of their gates, and old money can always spot a desperate fraud from a mile away. The inevitable collapse happened right in the center of the room, surrounded by the wealthiest women in the entire state. Beatrice Sterling, the formidable wife of a prominent banking CEO and an avid collector of rare gemstones, approached Jada with a polite but highly predatory smile. "Oh, what a substantial stone you have there," Beatrice said, reaching out to take Jada's hand before she could even pull away. Beatrice pulled a small, gold-plated jeweler's loop from her designer clutch, a quirky habit she was famous for in their circles, and leaned in to inspect the gem closely. The entire room went dead silent, the surrounding women pausing their conversations to watch the spectacle unfold. Jada beamed with profound pride, waiting for the ultimate validation she so desperately craved. But Beatrice lowered the loop, her polite smile morphing into an expression of profound, condescending pity. "Oh, my dear," Beatrice sighed loudly, her voice projecting clearly across the quiet room. "Whoever sold this to your husband should be immediately arrested for fraud. This is not a diamond. It is cubic zirconia, and a rather poor quality one at that. You can clearly see the underlying glass matrix and the total lack of thermal refraction. The setting is just cheap metal plated to look like white gold. You can already see the copper base showing through the band." The collective gasp from the surrounding women was absolutely deafening. A wave of muffled laughter and vicious cutting whispers immediately rippled through the ballroom. Jada snatched her hand back as if she had been physically burned. The color violently drained from her face, leaving her completely pale and trembling. She tried to stammer out a defense, claiming Beatrice did not know what she was talking about, but the damage was permanently done. The illusion of her grand $90 million life shattered right there on the polished marble floor. She was not a queen entering high society. She was a complete joke, a pathetic fraud wearing a $200 piece of glass. Jada turned on her heels and literally ran from the ballroom, tears of sheer agonizing humiliation blurring her vision as the mocking laughter followed her all the way out the heavy brass doors. I watched the live camera feed from the safety of my motel room as Jada threw the front door of my house open, her face streaked with ruined makeup and hot, angry tears. Looking at that fake chunk of glass on her shaking finger My mind drifted back 40 years. When I proposed to her mother, Loretta, I did not have a massive bank account or a flashy corporate job. I gave her a modest quarter-carat diamond ring. It was small, but it was absolutely real. I paid for that ring by working brutal overtime shifts in freezing conditions, eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for 6 solid months. Every single facet of that tiny diamond was bought with honest blood, sweat, and calloused hands. Loretta wore it with immense pride until the very day she passed away because she knew the profound, unbreakable love and sacrifice it represented. Bradley had given Jada a massive, empty lie, a perfect reflection of his own hollow character. Bradley was sitting in the living room pouring himself a stiff drink when Jada stormed in like a hurricane. She did not say a word. She marched straight up to him, ripped the fake ring off her finger, and hurled it directly at his face. The cheap metal bounced off his forehead and clattered uselessly onto the hardwood floor. "You humiliated me," she screamed, her voice tearing through the house with a raw, agonizing fury. "A piece of glass. Bradley, you gave me a $200 piece of glass and let me walk into a room full of billionaires to be laughed at." The argument that erupted was violent and catastrophic. Bradley, cornered and completely exposed, resorted to his usual toxic deflections. He yelled back, calling her ungrateful and stupid, loudly claiming he was just protecting their assets until the lottery money officially cleared. But Jada was no longer buying his pathetic excuses. The physical sting of public humiliation had finally broken through his intense manipulation. She grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the side table and launched it straight at his head. He ducked, and the vase smashed violently against the wall, raining sharp shards across the room. She screamed that she was done, that he was a massive liar and a complete failure. Bradley grabbed her shoulders and shoved her forcefully backward onto the couch, telling her to shut her mouth before she ruined everything. The house was descending into absolute chaos, ripping apart at the seams under the weight of his endless lies. As the domestic war zone played out on my security feed, my encrypted phone buzzed rapidly on the motel nightstand. It was Evelyn, and her tone was incredibly severe, completely devoid of her usual sharp wit. "Monty," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, hushed level. "Things are escalating much faster than we projected. I just got off a secure line with my contact inside the police department's organized crime unit. The Apex Financial Syndicate is absolutely done playing games with your son-in-law. That red paint and the knife on the door were just a polite courtesy notice. They know his bank accounts are completely frozen, and they know he has absolutely no liquid cash to make the first interest payment." Evelyn took a deep breath. "The loan sharks have officially issued a final ultimatum. They intercepted him on his burner phone 20 minutes ago. If Bradley does not deliver $10 million in untraceable cash covering both the principal loan and the extortionate interest fees within exactly 48 hours, they are not going to take the house. They are going to take his life. And Monty, these specific men do not make idle threats. The clock is officially ticking. The final 48 hours had begun, and Bradley was completely out of moves. Bradley stormed out of the house, desperate to escape the suffocating walls of his crumbling marriage and the terrifying reality of his frozen bank accounts. He jumped into the driver's seat of the sleek, heavily leased Porsche he had acquired just days prior to maintain his wealthy facade, slamming his foot onto the gas pedal. The engine roared as he sped down the slick, rain-washed suburban streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He was frantically trying to outrun the massive financial consequences closing in around him. But you cannot outrun the Apex Financial Syndicate. As he turned onto a deserted, poorly lit industrial road near the edge of town, a massive matte black SUV swerved violently into his lane, slamming on its brakes and forcing Bradley to screech to a terrifying, smoking halt. Before he could even shift the Porsche into reverse to escape, a second identical SUV boxed him in from behind, bumping his rear bumper with a sickening crunch. The trap was perfectly executed. 4 massive men stepped out of the vehicles into the cold night air, their faces completely devoid of emotion. They did not rush. They moved with the terrifying, deliberate confidence of predators who had their prey entirely cornered. The lead enforcer, a man with a thick neck and dead shark-like eyes, walked slowly up to the driver's side window of the Porsche and tapped the glass with the heavy steel barrel of a suppressed handgun. Bradley scrambled to unlock the door, his hands shaking so violently he could barely press the electronic button. The enforcer ripped the door open, grabbed Bradley by the collar of his expensive silk shirt, and dragged him entirely out of the vehicle. He threw Bradley onto the wet, oily asphalt. Bradley scrambled backward, scraping his palms against the rough pavement, begging and pleading for his life. "Please, I have the money coming." Bradley stammered, tears of sheer panic streaming down his pale face. "The state lottery payout clears in exactly 3 days. You know I have the winning ticket. Just give me 72 hours and I will wire you the entire $5 million plus whatever extra you want." The enforcer stepped forward and pressed the cold steel barrel of the handgun directly against the center of Bradley's forehead, pressing hard enough to leave a deep red indentation. The streetlights flickered above them, casting long, sinister shadows across the empty road. "You do not owe us $5 million anymore, Brad," the enforcer said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a violent shiver down Bradley's spine. "You defaulted on the primary interest payment this morning. The penalty clauses in that contract you blindly signed are completely non-negotiable. The total amount due is now $10 million, covering the principal, the default penalties, and the maximum penalty interest. And we do not accept wire transfers from flagged accounts. We want untraceable physical cash." Bradley gasped for air, his chest heaving in absolute terror. $10 million? I cannot get $10 million in cash by Friday. That is logistically impossible. The enforcer cocked the hammer of the gun. The sharp mechanical click echoed loudly in the quiet industrial park. "That sounds like a personal problem, Brad. The boss sent me here to deliver a very simple message. You have exactly 3 days until the lottery office opens its doors on payout Friday. If you do not walk out of that building and hand us $10 million in cash, we are not going to bother taking your house. The boss wants us to take both of your hands. We are going to sever them right at the wrists, so you can never forge another document or sign another fraudulent contract as long as you live." The enforcer leaned down, his breath hot against Bradley's terrified face. 3 days, Brad. Tick-tock. The men climbed back into their unmarked vehicles and vanished into the night, leaving Bradley shivering in a puddle on the dark asphalt. Bradley remained curled on the wet pavement long after the taillights of the SUVs disappeared into the distance. For his entire adult life, he had operated strictly within the safe, sterile confines of white-collar corporate offices. He was a man who firmly believed that all problems could be solved with a smooth conversation, a newly forged signature, or a cleverly rewritten financial spreadsheet. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of corporate leverage, manipulating numbers on a glowing screen to fake his way to the top of the elite social ladder. But the criminal underworld does not care about your networking skills, your golf handicap, or your tailored suits. They do not send strongly worded emails from a corporate legal department when you default on a loan. They deal in absolute violence, broken bones, and permanent bloody consequences. The brutal reality of the syndicate was a language that a half-baked, cowardly broker like Bradley could never possibly understand until the loaded barrel of a gun was pressed directly between his eyes. An hour later, Bradley stumbled back through the front door of the house. He was completely intoxicated, having stopped at a cheap dive bar to drown his paralyzing fear in multiple glasses of cheap whiskey. Jada was sitting on the living room sofa, still wearing her ruined high society dress, staring blankly at the wall, surrounded by the shattered pieces of the ceramic vase from their earlier fight. When she saw him enter, she stood up ready to resume their vicious argument about the fake cubic zirconia ring that had destroyed her social standing. But Bradley did not give her the chance to speak a single word. The terrifying encounter with the syndicate had completely shattered his sanity, and he violently misdirected all of his overwhelming fear right onto her. He stormed across the room, deliberately kicking a broken vase shard across the floor, and got directly in her face. "You think you are so special," he screamed, spit flying from his lips as the heavy alcohol fueled his blind rage. "You are absolutely nothing without me. You sit around whining about a cheap piece of jewelry while I am out here risking my actual life to secure our massive fortune. Listen to me very closely, Jada. The second that $90 million transfer hits my bank account on Friday, I am officially done with you. I am filing for divorce, and I am throwing you out on the street exactly like we did to your pathetic father. You will not see a single dime of my money." Bradley stumbled heavily up the stairs, locking himself inside the master bedroom and leaving Jada completely alone in the wrecked, darkened living room. The grand illusion of her wealthy, perfect marriage had officially burned to the ground. The man she had blindly defended, the man she had allowed to throw her own father out into the freezing rain, had just promised to discard her the moment he got his payout. She finally realized she was nothing more than a temporary prop in his delusional fantasy. Shortly after midnight, as I sat in my motel room meticulously reviewing the latest camera feeds, my secure phone began to ring. I looked down at the glowing caller ID. It was Jada. I let it ring 3 times, listening to the rhythmic buzzing in the quiet room before I finally pressed answer. "Dad," she sobbed into the receiver, her voice trembling with absolute devastation and panic. "Dad, please help me. Bradley is completely losing his mind. He came home drunk and screaming. He said he is going to divorce me and leave me with nothing as soon as he gets the money. I do not know what to do. I have no access to the bank accounts. I am so scared of him right now. Please, Dad, I need you to come back." I sat in the dim light of the motel, listening to the desperate pleading cries of the daughter who had explicitly told me I belonged in a nursing home just days prior so she could maintain her wealthy image. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single word of fatherly comfort. I spoke with absolute unwavering finality. "That is the man you chose, Jada." I ended the call, turned off my phone entirely, and went to sleep. The morning sun brought absolutely no relief to the house I had built. I watched the live, high-definition feed from my motel room as Jada, still wearing yesterday's ruined designer dress, slowly dragged herself down the stairs to answer a sharp, aggressive pounding at the front door. When she pulled the heavy oak door open, she was not greeted by a delivery driver or a concerned neighbor checking on the shattered glass from the night before. Standing on the front porch was Monica. Bradley's secret mistress was dressed impeccably in a crisp white tailored suit holding the handle of a massive, incredibly expensive designer suitcase. She did not wait for an invitation. Monica pushed forcefully past Jada with a loud scoff, rolling her heavy luggage directly into the center of the living room. She took off her oversized sunglasses, looked Jada up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, and issued a completely brazen command. "You need to pack your cheap bags and leave right now," Monica said, her voice echoing with absolute entitlement. "Bradley promised me this house. We are flying to Monaco on Friday, and I need to start redecorating this suburban dump before we put it on the market. Get out of my living room." Jada stood frozen for a fraction of a second, her sleep-deprived brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of the blonde woman standing in her home. Then the shock evaporated entirely, replaced by a violent, highly protective fury. She lunged forward, grabbing the handle of Monica's designer suitcase and violently shoving it back toward the front door. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Jada screamed, her voice cracking with pure rage. "This is my house. I am his wife. Get out before I call the police." Monica did not back down for a single second. She laughed a cruel mocking sound and shoved Jada hard in the chest. "You are nothing but a placeholder," Monica spat back. "Brad told me everything. He told me how pathetic you are, how you whine about fake jewelry, and how he absolutely cannot wait to dump you the second that $90 million wire transfer clears. I am the one he actually loves." The verbal altercation escalated instantly into a brutal physical struggle. Jada grabbed a fistful of Monica's tailored jacket, and the two women violently crashed into the coffee table, sending magazines and decorative glass shattering across the hardwood floor. They screamed and tore at each other in the center of the wreckage. Suddenly, the front door flew wide open. Bradley stormed inside, his eyes bloodshot and his face twisted with the lingering, terrifying stress of his underworld death threat. He saw the two women physically fighting over his fake empire. He did not try to de-escalate the situation peacefully. He did not protect the woman he had been married to for a decade. He marched directly over to them, grabbed Jada roughly by the shoulder, and violently threw her backward. As she stumbled, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face with such brutal force that she collapsed entirely onto the floor. Jada laid there, gasping for air, clutching her burning cheek. Bradley stood over her, breathing heavily, and pulled Monica firmly against his side. "Monica is staying," he roared, his voice echoing through the damaged house. "I told you last night that I was completely done with you. Pack whatever garbage you brought into this marriage and get out of my house. If you are not gone by the time I get back from my meetings, I will throw your things on the lawn myself." He grabbed Monica's hand, stepping right over Jada as if she were a piece of trash, and marched up the stairs to the master bedroom. Laying on the cold floor, listening to the heavy footsteps of her husband and his mistress moving around her bedroom, Jada finally felt the profound, agonizing sting of true humiliation. For her entire adult life, she had viewed herself as superior, convinced that marrying a flashy white broker elevated her above her working-class roots. She had stood on that exact same porch just days ago and coldly watched Bradley throw her own father's belongings onto the wet grass. She had told the man who sacrificed his entire life to feed, clothe, and educate her that he belonged in a nursing home just so she could maintain a wealthy image. Now she was experiencing the exact same brutal discard. The universe was forcing her to swallow the bitter poison she had so eagerly served to me. She was utterly broken, abandoned, and entirely stripped of all her fake dignity. 2 hours later, a frantic pounding shook the door of my motel room. When I opened it, Jada fell forward, dropping entirely to her knees on the stained carpet. Her face was bruised, her designer clothes were torn, and she was sobbing so violently she could barely catch her breath. "Dad, I am so sorry," she choked out, wrapping her arms tightly around my legs. "You were right about everything. He is an absolute monster. He brought another woman into our house. He hit me and kicked me out. Please, Dad, please forgive me. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at her. I did not bend down to comfort her, nor did I offer a warm paternal embrace. I stepped back, forcing her to stand on her own 2 feet. I walked over to the small digital safe I had installed in the closet, punched in the security code, and pulled out my encrypted tablet. I brought up the high-definition video I had captured just days prior. I handed her the glowing screen. "Watch this," I commanded, my voice completely flat. Jada stared at the tablet, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she watched crisp, clear footage of Bradley and Monica engaging in a passionate, illicit affair right on her living room sofa. She listened to the flawless audio of her husband promising to divorce her and flee to Monaco the moment the lottery money cleared. She heard him call her pathetic and annoying. It was undeniable, brutal proof that her marriage had been a complete sham long before the winning ticket was ever drawn. He had never loved her. He had only ever used her as a convenient stepping stone. The final remnants of Jada's fragile psyche completely collapsed. She dropped the tablet onto the bed and buried her face in her hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing wail. She had sacrificed her family, her deep morals, and her own father for a man who thoroughly despised her. She was drowning in the terrifying reality of her choices, completely cornered by the devastating consequences of her own blinding greed. I let her cry for exactly 2 minutes before I spoke. My voice was calm, authoritative, and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Crying will not fix this, Jada," I said, crossing my arms over my chest. "You chose the illusion of wealth over your own blood. Now you are paying the ultimate price, but I am going to offer you one single, non-negotiable way out of this nightmare. If you want to be saved from the absolute ruin your husband is about to bring down upon your head, you are going to do exactly what I say. The payout day at the State Lottery Commission is in exactly 48 hours. You are going to go back to that house, you are going to swallow your pride, and you are going to play a very specific role in a performance I have meticulously orchestrated. If you follow my script flawlessly, you get to walk away. If you deviate for even a single second, I will let the criminal syndicate handle the both of you. Do we have a deal?" The exterior of my house looked like an active crime scene. The thick, blood-red paint had dried on the front windows, and the deep gash from the hunting knife was still entirely visible on the heavy oak door. Yet inside those walls, Bradley and Monica were completely ignoring the impending threat of a violent criminal syndicate. They were living in a manufactured delusion. I watched through the hidden living room camera as they popped open another bottle of stolen vintage champagne. They were lounging on the very sofa where Bradley had so callously discarded my daughter, completely intoxicated by the prospect of tomorrow. Bradley held up his glass, a smug, relaxed grin plastered across his face. He truly believed that the rising sun would wash away all his sins. He was convinced that the moment he walked into the lottery headquarters on Payout Friday, the massive $90 million wire transfer would instantly clear his underworld debts. He thought he could just hand the loan sharks a heavy duffel bag of cash, finalize his brutal divorce from Jada, and secure his private jet to Monaco before the weekend was over. He raised his crystal glass to Monica, declaring that tomorrow morning they would officially become untouchable royalty. The staggering weight of the $10 million death threat was completely suppressed by his massive, blinding greed. But Bradley could never just take a win quietly. His fragile ego demanded a massive public spectacle. He wanted the entire world to look at him with deep, envious admiration. Desperate to create a highly publicized media circus, he scraped together the absolute last remaining funds he had access to. He drained Monica's personal checking account with her eager permission and pawned his collection of luxury watches just to secure cash for one final arrogant flex. Through his cloned laptop, I watched him meticulously coordinate his grand entrance. He hired a massive, pristine white stretch limousine to pick them up right at the front door. He did not stop there. He hired 4 heavily armed private security guards to flank him, completely convinced he was now a high-profile target worthy of an executive detail. He spent hours pacing the floor, practicing his billionaire posture and rehearsing his arrogant speech. Then he made his most reckless and narcissistic move yet. He spent the late hours of the night sending out anonymous tips and press releases to every single major local news station and financial blog in the city. He tipped off the reporters that the mysterious $90 million lottery winner was finally coming forward to claim the prize in a highly publicized event. He promised them exclusive interviews and a grand photo opportunity right in front of the Lottery Commission headquarters. He wanted cameras flashing. He wanted microphones shoved in his face. He wanted to be the headline story on every evening broadcast. He was meticulously building a massive pedestal for himself, absolutely blind to the fact that the higher he elevated his public profile, the more devastating and widely broadcast his impending downfall would be. He was actively inviting the entire city to watch his total destruction on live television. While Bradley spent his final hours screaming loudly into a telephone and fueling a frantic champagne-soaked media circus, I sat in the absolute deadly silence of Evelyn Wright's downtown law office. The contrast between his foolish, chaotic noise and my calculating stillness was profound. I had spent my entire life working with high-voltage electricity. I knew that the most lethal power never makes a sound before it strikes. It courses quietly through the wires, completely undetected, until the exact moment the circuit is completed. Bradley was dancing around, making a massive spectacle, trying to convince the world of his absolute power. I was sitting in a leather chair, sipping black coffee, patiently waiting to flip the master breaker and plunge his entire fake reality into total darkness. Evelyn sat across from me at her polished mahogany desk, her fingers typing rapidly across her keyboard. She looked up, a sharp, predatory smile crossing her face. "The trap is officially armed, Monty," she said, turning her monitor so I could see the screen. "We had just drafted a highly confidential, legally binding injunction and transmitted it directly to the director of the State Lottery Commission. The document did not report the physical receipt as stolen. That would have simply canceled the transaction and sent Bradley home empty-handed without a public scene. Instead, we submitted a formal security mandate requiring absolute, irrefutable digital verification for the payout of that specific winning ticket. We explicitly instructed the commission that the bearer of the physical paper receipt must also successfully log into the verified state lottery application, present a matching government-issued photo ID, and pass a live biometric scan directly at the VIP counter before a single dollar could be released. The digital lock was officially recognized by the state. The legal net was completely pulled tight. There was absolutely no loophole, no forged signature, and no smooth-talking excuse that could possibly bypass this level of institutional security. Bradley was walking into an impenetrable vault armed with nothing but a worthless piece of paper. The sun rose the next morning, casting a bright, unforgiving light on Payout Friday. I watched the final live feed from the exterior house cameras. The massive white stretch limousine pulled up to the curb exactly on schedule. The 4 hired security guards stepped out, forming a protective perimeter. The front door swung open and Bradley emerged wearing a brand new custom-tailored suit, looking every bit the arrogant billionaire he pretended to be. Monica was right on his arm, dressed in a tight red designer gown, waving to the empty street as if she were walking a Hollywood red carpet. They climbed into the back of the limousine, the heavy tinted doors shutting behind them, and the vehicle slowly rolled away from the house. But my cameras caught something else, something terrifying. Parked discreetly at the end of the suburban street, entirely hidden in the early morning shadows, were 2 massive matte black SUVs. The moment Bradley's white limousine turned the corner, the engines of those dark vehicles roared to life. The Apex Financial Syndicate had not forgotten the deadline. The 48-hour ultimatum had officially expired, and the loan sharks were not going to wait for a polite phone call. They pulled out of the shadows and began tailing the limousine closely, following Bradley straight toward his highly publicized destination. The final collision was securely in motion. The crisp morning air outside the State Lottery Commission headquarters was absolutely electric, buzzing with the frantic, overlapping energy of a major media event. Dozens of local news vans were parked haphazardly along the busy downtown avenue, their towering satellite dishes extended toward the pale morning sky. Reporters holding branded microphones practiced their opening lines, while eager cameramen jockeyed for the best possible angle near the heavy glass doors of the main entrance. Bradley had done a spectacular job of alerting the press. He had practically guaranteed them the story of the decade, a mysterious local man claiming an astronomical jackpot. Right at 9 o'clock, the massive white stretch limousine turned the corner and glided smoothly to a halt directly in front of the building's main concrete plaza. The moment the oversized vehicle came to a complete stop, a chaotic chorus of camera shutters erupted. The brilliant flashes of white light strobed continuously, reflecting blindingly off the polished paint of the limousine and the surrounding office windows. The 4 heavily armed private security guards stepped out first, forcefully pushing back the eager crowd of journalists and curious onlookers to create a clear, dramatic pathway to the entrance. The stage was perfectly set. The heavy, tinted rear door of the limousine finally swung open, and Bradley stepped out into the blinding barrage of camera flashes. He moved with the exaggerated theatrical swagger of a conquering king returning to claim his rightful throne. He paused on the edge of the concrete curb, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit, actively soaking in the collective attention of the entire city. Monica emerged right behind him, looking absolutely radiant in her tight red designer gown, her blonde hair perfectly styled to catch the morning breeze. She immediately linked her arm tightly through his, flashing a bright, practiced smile at the crowd of hungry reporters. Bradley raised his chin, his chest puffed out with an impenetrable armor of absolute arrogance. He reached into his breast pocket and slowly pulled out the stolen printed lottery receipt. He held the small, fragile piece of paper high above his head for every single camera lens to capture. "Look closely, everyone!" Bradley shouted over the chaotic noise of the press corps, his voice booming with unhinged euphoria. "Take a very good look. Today is the day everything changes. They said I was just another average broker, but look at me now. $90 million. I am not just a winner. I am an absolute legend." The reporters aggressively pushed their microphones forward over the security perimeter, shouting dozens of questions all at once. They asked about his plans for the massive fortune, his sudden rise to extreme wealth, and the identity of his beautiful companion. Bradley ate up every single second of the attention. He boasted loudly about his incoming fleet of luxury cars, his upcoming private flight to Monaco, and the massive real estate developments he planned to initiate by the end of the month. He was putting on a masterclass in profound narcissism, completely intoxicated by the blinding flashes and the chorus of voices shouting his name. He stood there on the concrete plaza, clutching a worthless piece of paper, entirely convinced that he had permanently secured his place in the absolute highest tier of human society. This desperate, highly publicized media spectacle was the ultimate culmination of Bradley's lifelong obsession with superficial status. For his entire adult life, he had been profoundly terrified of being perceived as ordinary. He consumed endless hours of content featuring billionaires and self-made moguls, desperately studying their mannerisms and adopting their arrogant speech patterns to mask his own deep, crippling insecurities. He never wanted to actually put in the grueling, silent work required to build genuine wealth. He only ever wanted the applause, the flashing cameras, and the blinding spotlight. By intentionally inviting the local press to document his massive lottery payout, he was desperately trying to validate his fake, inflated ego. But his profound obsession with public image had completely blinded him to the extreme danger of his situation. By ensuring that every news camera in the city was broadcasting his exact location live, he had successfully built a massive, inescapable public stage for his own absolute catastrophic humiliation. Just as Bradley began to slowly make his way up the wide concrete steps toward the heavy glass doors of the lottery headquarters, a rusted yellow city taxi pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind the massive white stretch limousine. The taxi's brakes squealed loudly, a harsh grating sound that briefly cut through the chaotic noise of the surrounding media circus. The rear door creaked open and I stepped out onto the pavement. I was not wearing a custom-tailored suit or flashy designer accessories. I wore a simple, well-pressed navy blue blazer, a clean white shirt, and my favorite pair of comfortable polished boots. I moved with the slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered pace of a man who knew exactly how this day was going to end. Right behind me stepped Evelyn Wright. My attorney looked absolutely formidable. She wore a sharp charcoal gray power suit carrying a sleek leather briefcase that contained every single legal document needed to completely dismantle the man standing on the stairs above us. We did not alert the press. We did not demand any attention. We simply walked side by side toward the building, completely ignoring the flashing cameras and the shouting reporters pushing against the barricades. The contrast between my quiet, grounded reality and Bradley's loud, desperate fantasy could not have been more profound. Bradley was halfway up the stairs when he finally glanced over his shoulder and spotted me walking through the dense crowd. He stopped dead in his tracks, his arrogant smile freezing for a split second before transforming into a cruel, mocking sneer. He let out a loud, theatrical burst of laughter, pointing directly at me so the reporters would turn their cameras in my direction. "What is this?" Bradley shouted, his voice echoing across the concrete plaza. "Did you get lost on your way to the nursing home, Monty? Or are you just an old man begging for some spare change from the new king of the city?" The crowd of reporters murmured, their cameras quickly pivoting to capture the bizarre confrontation. Bradley snapped his fingers aggressively, signaling his heavily armed private security detail. "Do not let that pathetic old man anywhere near me," Bradley commanded, waving his hand dismissively. "Keep the trash off the steps." Two large security guards immediately stepped forward, moving to block my path to the entrance. I did not flinch. I did not shout back. I simply looked up at Bradley, locked eyes with him, and let a calm, knowing smile spread across my face. Evelyn seamlessly stepped in front of the guards, flashing her state bar credentials with absolute terrifying authority. They instantly backed down, recognizing a legal force they could not physically challenge. I adjusted my jacket, slipped smoothly past the hesitant guards, and walked straight through the heavy glass doors into the main lobby, leaving Bradley outside to enjoy the final few seconds of his spectacular illusion. The grand lobby of the State Lottery Commission was a cavernous, intimidating space constructed of polished marble and cold steel. Bradley marched through the heavy glass doors like a conquering general, completely oblivious to my quiet entrance just moments before. The swarm of reporters and cameramen spilled into the lobby right behind him, their heavy equipment clattering loudly against the pristine floor. He completely ignored the standard waiting area, bypassing a dozen ordinary citizens, and strutted directly toward the elevated VIP claim counter reserved exclusively for massive jackpot winners. Monica was practically glued to his side, flashing her brilliant practice smile for the dozens of camera lenses focused squarely on them. Bradley slapped his palms flat against the cold marble of the counter. With a highly theatrical flourish, he reached into his custom-tailored suit jacket, pulled out the slightly crumpled paper receipt, and slammed it down in front of the female clerk. He turned back to the flashing cameras, striking a triumphant pose, waiting for the massive ceremonial check to be brought out. "We are here to claim the $90 million, Bradley announced loudly, making absolute certain that every single microphone in the room picked up his voice. The clerk, sitting behind the thick, bulletproof glass, did not smile. She did not offer congratulations or shake his hand. She simply picked up the printed piece of paper with a profound look of bureaucratic boredom. She slid the barcode under a heavy industrial laser scanner. Bradley puffed out his chest, completely ready for the triumphant ringing bells and falling confetti he had seen on television. Instead, a harsh grating and incredibly loud electronic buzzer echoed throughout the cavernous lobby. A bright red error light flashed aggressively on the digital monitors facing the crowd. The clerk frowned, tapped a few keys on her terminal, and scanned the receipt a second time. The exact same piercing, angry red beep filled the room. The camera flashes suddenly stopped. The chaotic murmuring of the press corps died down into a tense, heavy silence. Bradley's arrogant smile faltered for the very first time. He leaned over the marble counter, his voice dropping its confident boom. "What is the problem?" he demanded, tapping the glass impatiently. "The machine must be broken. Scan it again." The clerk did not scan it again. Instead, she pressed a small button beneath her desk. The heavy oak doors situated directly behind the VIP counter swung open. A tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out, flanked immediately by two heavily armed state troopers. It was the regional director of the Lottery Commission. He walked up to the glass, picked up the paper receipt, and looked down at Bradley with absolute icy contempt. The director pressed the intercom button so his voice would project clearly to the entire room. "You are not Montgomery Hayes," the director stated coldly, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "This printed receipt you just handed my clerk is completely worthless without the original authenticated digital application to back it up." Bradley stared at the director, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He simply could not comprehend the words being spoken to him. The director held up the piece of paper for the press to see. Under the State Digital Anti-Theft Lottery Act passed 2 years ago, Physical printouts from digital purchases are explicitly classified as mere transaction records, not bearer instruments. The actual legally binding ticket does not exist on this piece of paper. It exists solely on our secure biometric locked state servers tied permanently to the purchaser's verified social security number and mobile identity. The director dropped the paper receipt into a nearby shredder bin. The sharp mechanical whir of the blades destroying the paper echoed through the quiet room. Unless you can instantly log into the Montgomery Hayes account and pass a live facial recognition scan right here at this counter, you have absolutely zero legal claim to this money. The reality of the situation crashed down on Bradley with the destructive force of a freight train. He froze completely, his entire body going rigid as the blood violently drained from his face. The $10 million death threat from the Apex Financial Syndicate suddenly flashed before his eyes. The unmarked SUVs tailing his limousine were waiting right outside the glass doors. He had no money, he had no leverage. He had just handed his own executioners the exact time and place to find him. His shock instantly mutated into a blind, terrifying panic. No, Bradley screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "That is my money. I have the ticket. I am the winner. Give me my money right now." He threw his entire body against the bulletproof glass, pounding his fists violently against the thick barrier. Monica shrieked and jumped backward, terrified by his sudden explosion of unhinged violence. Bradley completely lost his mind. He swept his arms across the marble counter, violently knocking heavy acrylic displays, informational brochures, and metal stanchions crashing onto the floor. "I will sue this entire state," he roared, spit flying from his mouth as he kicked the counter. "I have lawyers. I will destroy you." The reporters surrounding him did not step in to help. They aggressively shoved their cameras closer, capturing every single agonizing second of his complete public psychological breakdown. The man who had desperately craved the spotlight was now burning alive inside of it. The two armed state troopers immediately rushed around the VIP counter. They grabbed Bradley by the shoulders of his custom-tailored suit, forcefully pulling him away from the glass and pinning his arms tightly to his sides. He continued to thrash and kick like a wild animal, screaming obscenities at the director and the flashing cameras. The intense media frenzy had transformed into absolute shock. As Bradley struggled against the troopers, his wild eyes frantically scanned the crowded lobby. Suddenly, the dense wall of reporters, cameramen, and curious onlookers began to part. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like the Red Sea separating to make way for a profound force. They stepped aside, creating a wide, clear path directly down the center of the marble floor. I adjusted the cuffs of my navy blue blazer, feeling the comforting presence of Evelyn Wright walking right beside me. I moved with slow, steady, and terrifyingly calm precision. The entire lobby went dead silent, the only sound being the rhythmic tapping of my polished boots against the hard stone. I did not look at the cameras. I did not look at the stunned face of Monica, who was currently cowering against a concrete pillar trying to hide her face from the press. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the pathetic screaming man being restrained by the police. I reached the very front of the crowd, stopping just inches away from the VIP podium. I looked at Bradley, offered him that same quiet, knowing smile I had given him on the front lawn days ago, and slowly stepped up to the counter. I did not say a single word to Bradley as I stepped up to the polished marble counter. The two state troopers held him firmly off to the side, his chest heaving with exertion, his custom suit wrinkled and ruined from his frantic struggle. I reached into the inside pocket of my navy blazer and withdrew my smartphone alongside my physical state identification card. I unlocked the screen with my fingerprint, navigating smoothly to the official state lottery application. I tapped the large pulsing button labeled Claim Digital Prize. A high-contrast secure QR code immediately populated on my screen. I slid my phone face down under the exact same industrial laser scanner that had just aggressively rejected Bradley's stolen piece of paper. I placed my driver license right next to it, sliding it through the small gap in the bulletproof glass toward the clerk. The entire lobby held its collective breath. The aggressive shouting of the press completely ceased. The only sound in the massive, cavernous room was the soft, mechanical hum of the scanner reading my encrypted digital code. A pleasant melodic chime echoed through the VIP area, instantly followed by the large digital monitors facing the crowd, turning a brilliant, vibrant green. The regional director leaned forward, closely inspecting his personal monitor as my authenticated biometric data and banking details flooded his secure system. He picked up my driver license, meticulously verifying my face against the state records. The stern, icy expression he had directed at Bradley vanished entirely, replaced by a warm, highly respectful smile. He pressed the intercom button. "Congratulations, Mr. Montgomery Hayes," the director announced, his voice carrying a profound, undeniable weight across the silent lobby. "Your digital ticket is fully authenticated and legally verified. The $90 million jackpot is officially yours." The words hit Bradley with the physical force of a sledgehammer. The frenzied, animalistic fighting instantly drained from his body, leaving him completely limp. The state troopers actually had to support his weight to keep him from collapsing face-first onto the floor right there on the spot. His eyes widened to impossible proportions as the sheer, unadulterated horror of his reality finally sank into his brain. He stared at the glowing green screens, then at me, and then down at the empty space on the counter where his shredded piece of paper used to be. The catastrophic twist violently rewired his reality in real time. He had not just lost out on a massive fortune. He had actively, aggressively traded his actual life to a violent criminal syndicate in exchange for $5 million he could never possibly repay. He had stolen a printed receipt, foolishly assuming that modern wealth still operated on 20th century rules. He had forged my signature to illegally mortgage a house he did not own. He had alienated his wife, paraded his mistress, and painted a massive, glowing public target on his own back all over a piece of scrap paper that was absolutely worthless from the very second he picked it up off my kitchen counter. His grand $90 million empire was nothing more than a lethal trap I had calmly allowed him to lock himself inside. As the clerk began printing the official transfer documents and the tax withholding forms, I glanced down at the winning numbers displayed on my phone screen. They were not randomly generated digits spat out by a computer. They were the precise sequence of the day, month, and year my beautiful Loretta was born, followed by the exact date of our wedding anniversary. I had played those exact same numbers every single week for the past 30 years. It was a quiet, personal tribute to the woman who had built my life with me. A routine that kept her memory alive in my daily life. Bradley had lived under my roof for a decade and never once bothered to learn a single meaningful detail about my history or my family. If he had possessed even a fraction of human decency, he might have recognized those numbers when he looked at the ticket. Instead, his blinding greed prevented him from seeing that he was trying to steal a blessing sent directly from the woman he constantly disrespected. The troopers finally released their tight grip on Bradley's shoulders, realizing he was no longer a physical threat to anyone but himself. Stripped entirely of his fake power and his imaginary fortune, his legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed heavily onto the cold marble floor, his expensive designer slacks pooling awkwardly around his knees. He did not scream or thrash anymore. He just knelt there, his entire body trembling violently as if he were standing bare in freezing snow. He looked up at me from the floor, his face completely pale, cold sweat beading on his forehead. The arrogant, untouchable broker who had thrown my suitcase onto the wet lawn just days ago was entirely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified man looking directly into the abyss of his own making. He raised his shaking hands, pressing them hard against his face as a low, guttural sob escaped his throat. He had orchestrated his own total destruction on live television, cementing his status not as a legendary billionaire but as the biggest, most humiliated fraud in the history of the city. He had spent his last dollars to hire a limousine and invite the press to document his execution. The media frenzy erupted once again, twice as loud and aggressive as before. Reporters began shouting my name, begging for a statement, shoving their microphones toward the VIP counter to capture the real winner of the historic jackpot. Camera flashes fired in rapid succession, illuminating the stark contrast between the wealthy man standing at the counter and the ruined man weeping on the floor. But my attention was entirely drawn away from the flashing cameras and the pathetic display at my feet. I looked past the press barricades, scanning the outer edges of the crowded lobby. Standing silently near a massive marble pillar partially obscured by the dark shadows of the exit corridor was a man who clearly did not belong to the press corps. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark trench coat, his cold, dead eyes locked directly on the kneeling figure of Bradley. It was the lead enforcer from the Apex Financial Syndicate, the exact same man who had pressed a gun to Bradley's head on that deserted road. He did not pull a weapon. He did not need to make a scene. The slow, deliberate way he unbuttoned his coat and stared at his prey was a silent promise of absolute, inescapable violence. The loan sharks had clearly watched the live news broadcast. They knew the money was gone, and they had come to collect their flesh. At that exact moment, the chaotic noise inside the lobby was suddenly pierced by a much louder, much more terrifying sound coming from the street outside. The shrill, piercing wail of multiple police sirens echoed aggressively against the glass facade of the building, rapidly approaching the main plaza. The red and blue emergency lights began to strobe violently through the tall front windows, painting the terrified face of my son-in-law in a flashing, unavoidable warning. The final act was officially underway. The wail of the sirens outside acted like a starting gun for the man in the dark trench coat. Realizing his window of opportunity to extract his $10 million bounty was rapidly closing, the apex financial enforcer abandoned his subtle intimidation. He lunged forward, cutting through the stunned crowd of reporters with the sheer brutal physical force of a battering ram. He reached the center of the floor in seconds, grabbing Bradley roughly by the collar of his ruined custom suit. The enforcer hauled the weeping broker to his feet, his massive hand twisting the expensive fabric so tightly it choked the air from Bradley's lungs. Bradley flailed wildly, his expensive loafers slipping on the polished marble as the enforcer began dragging him backward toward the shadowed exit corridor. The loan shark did not care about the flashing cameras or the stunned state troopers. He had a singular mission to collect his boss's money or collect the man's hands. But before he could drag Bradley more than 10 feet across the lobby, the heavy front glass doors of the commission headquarters were violently thrown open. A heavily armed tactical unit of the city police department stormed into the building, their heavy boots thundering against the stone floor. "Move away from the suspect!" The lead detective roared, his voice cutting through the chaotic lobby with absolute authority. Dozens of uniformed officers fanned out, securing the perimeter and instantly neutralizing the threat of the syndicate enforcer. Recognizing a losing battle against a dozen drawn police weapons, the enforcer immediately released his iron grip on Bradley's collar, raised his hands in a gesture of fake compliance, and smoothly melted back into the chaotic fringes of the crowd to escape. Bradley collapsed onto his knees, once again gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. But his physical rescue from the criminal underworld was merely the beginning of his legal execution. The lead detective marched directly up to Bradley, pulling a thick stack of folded warrants from his tactical vest. Bradley Lawson, the detective, announced, his voice booming over the frantic clicking of 100 camera shutters. "You are formally under arrest." The detective did not lower his voice to spare Bradley any humiliation. He projected every single word so the entire press corps could capture the spectacular downfall on live television. "You are being charged with multiple counts of first-degree financial fraud, grand larceny, and the malicious forgery of legal documents. Furthermore, you are being indicted for criminal conspiracy to commit theft and illegally mortgaging a residential property using a falsified signature." Bradley shook his head frantically, his eyes darting between the armed officers and the relentless glare of the media spotlights. "No, you do not understand," Bradley sobbed, crawling backward on the marble floor. "It is a massive misunderstanding. I was going to pay it all back. I have the winning numbers." The detective did not even blink at the pathetic display. He simply reached down, grabbed Bradley by the bicep, and hoisted him up. There was absolutely no misunderstanding, and there would be no leniency. I glanced over at Evelyn Wright, who stood beside me with a posture of absolute unyielding triumph. She had not merely filed a standard police report. Working late into the night, she had delivered a flawless, impenetrable portfolio of devastating evidence directly to the district attorney. She provided the cloned hard drives, the recorded audio of his illicit confessions, the high-definition video from the hidden house cameras, and the falsified property deed verified by an independent handwriting expert. She had systematically eliminated every single legal loophole, every potential technicality, and every possible chance for a sympathetic judge to grant bail. Bradley was not going to a holding cell to await a quick release. He was going straight to a maximum security federal facility. The trap was watertight. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the detective ordered. Bradley resisted, his body shaking with a pathetic, rigid denial, but the officers were completely devoid of patience. 2 officers forcefully grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back with a sharp, practiced efficiency. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly into place, locking his wrists together. It was the definitive sound of a man losing his freedom forever. The cameras pushed closer, the bright lights illuminating his tear-streaked face, his ruined hair, and his sweat-soaked designer shirt. This was the exact media spectacle Bradley had spent his last stolen dollars to orchestrate. He had desperately wanted the entire state to watch him claim his fortune on the morning news. Now every single television screen in the city was broadcasting his humiliating perp walk in glorious high definition. He was being paraded before the public, completely stripped of his fake billionaire persona, exposed as a pathetic, desperate criminal who had tried to steal from an old man. The absolute totality of his destruction was permanently recorded for the entire world to witness. As the officers began to march him roughly toward the exit, Bradley completely lost whatever tiny fraction of dignity he had left. He dragged his feet against the marble, weeping loudly, a high-pitched, agonizing wail that echoed off the high ceilings. He desperately scanned the sea of faces surrounding him, looking for any possible lifeline to pull him from the wreckage. His wild eyes locked onto Monica. She was still cowering near a concrete pillar, using her designer purse to shield her face from the relentless media cameras. Monica Bradley screamed, his voice raw and pleading. "Call a lawyer. Use the money from the joint account. Do not leave me here." But his pleas were instantly drowned out by a new realization. Standing just a few feet away from Monica, having quietly pushed her way to the very front of the police barricade, was Jada. My daughter was wearing a simple coat over her clothes, her face devoid of makeup, her eyes completely dry and terrifyingly cold. She had followed my exact instructions and arrived just in time to watch the finale. Bradley saw her and gasped, his knees buckling as he realized his wife was standing right there. "Jada, please," he sobbed, pulling against the officer's grips, tears pouring down his chin. "I am so sorry. I love you. Please, you have to save me. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them it is our house." Monica stared at the pathetic, sobbing man kneeling on the cold marble floor. The blinding flashes of the press cameras illuminated the sheer terror in her eyes. It took her only a few seconds to process the catastrophic reality of the situation. Bradley was not a multimillionaire preparing to whisk her away to a private villa in Monaco. He was a spectacular, broke fraud facing a decade in federal prison and carrying a $10 million death sentence from a violent criminal syndicate. The illusion was completely shattered. Monica lowered her designer handbag and sneered, her face twisting into a mask of absolute, unadulterated disgust. She did not offer a single word of comfort to the man she had sworn to love just hours ago. Instead, she grabbed the flawless 2-carat diamond ring he had purchased with his last stolen dollars, yanked it violently off her finger, and threw it directly at his face. The heavy ring bounced hard against his cheekbone and clattered across the polished floor. "You are nothing but a broke, pathetic liar," Monica screamed, her voice echoing over the chaotic noise of the reporters. She turned on her expensive heels violently, shoving her way through the dense crowd of cameramen, desperate to escape the flashing lenses and distance herself from his radioactive downfall. She abandoned him without looking back a single time. Bradley wept openly as he watched his mistress sprint out the heavy glass doors. The police officers tightened their grip on his arms, preparing to drag him out to the waiting transport vehicles. But before they could move him, the crowd parted one more time. Jada stepped forward, crossing the invisible boundary between the press and the police perimeter. The officers hesitated, looking at her, but she moved with such cold, terrifying authority that they instinctively allowed her to approach. Bradley looked up at his wife. His tear-streaked face morphed into a mask of pathetic, desperate hope. He truly believed that the woman he had slapped, cheated on, and planned to leave destitute was going to somehow save him from his spectacular ruin. Jada stood over him, looking down at the kneeling, trembling man who had ruined her life. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope prepared meticulously by Evelyn Wright. With a swift, deliberate motion, she slapped the heavy envelope directly against Bradley's chest. He fumbled to catch it with his cuffed hands, his eyes darting down to read the bold legal print on the front. It was a fast-tracked petition for absolute divorce. Jada leaned in close, ensuring the dozens of microphones shoved over the barricade picked up her exact words. "You always wanted to be famous, Bradley," she said, her voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You wanted the entire world to look at you. Well, congratulations. Now the whole country knows you are nothing but a pathetic scumbag." The profound strength radiating from Jada in that moment was the direct result of a spectacular, agonizing transformation. Just 24 hours prior, she had hit absolute devastating rock bottom. She had experienced the searing public humiliation at the high society tea party, the physical violence from a man she blindly trusted, and the terrifying realization that her entire luxurious reality was built on a mountain of toxic debt and deceit. That intense, suffocating pain had burned away all of her superficial vanity and blinding materialism. The crucible of Bradley's betrayal had entirely stripped away the entitled, naive woman she had become, revealing the resilient, strong-willed daughter I had raised. She was no longer a victim trapped in a shiny fake cage. She was awake, and she was reclaiming her life with absolute ruthless precision. Jada turned her back on him and walked away, her head held high, completely ignoring the reporters shouting her name. Bradley realized he had absolutely no one left. The police began to drag him toward the exit, his expensive loafers scraping against the floor. He looked past the cameras, his wild, bloodshot eyes desperately searching the lobby until they locked onto me. I was standing near the VIP counter, my posture relaxed casually, observing the end of his reign. Dad Bradley screamed, his voice cracking into a raw, agonizing wail. "Dad, please save me. You cannot let them do this. I am your family. Please, I will do anything." He thrashed against the officers, abandoning every single shred of his pride to beg the very man he had thrown onto the wet grass just days ago. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of forgiveness, nor did I deliver a dramatic villain speech. True power requires absolute silence. I simply adjusted my navy blue blazer, turned my back on his screaming, and walked toward the exit with Evelyn at my side. We walked straight out the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the bright morning sun. Parked directly at the curb, waiting with its engine humming, was the massive white stretch limousine Bradley had rented with his final stolen dollars. I nodded to the chauffeur, who quickly opened the heavy rear door. Evelyn and I slid into the luxurious leather back seat. I told the driver to take us downtown, leaving Bradley to face the flashing cameras and the cold reality of a federal holding cell. The fallout from that morning was remarkably swift and absolutely devastating. A few days after Bradley was locked away in a maximum security federal detention center with no possibility of bail, the relentless machinery of consequences began to tear his fake empire apart piece by piece. The banks descended first. Heavily armed repossession agents arrived at the house with flatbed tow trucks, legally seizing the brand new Porsche he had parked in the driveway and freezing every single financial account associated with his name. But the criminal syndicate did not wait for court orders or polite legal paperwork. The apex financial enforcers arrived under the cover of darkness. They did not just break the door. They completely dismantled the interior of the property. They stripped the house of every single luxury item, designer watch, expensive television, and piece of high-end furniture Bradley had acquired, leaving nothing but bare walls, scuffed floors, and shattered glass. The total liquidation of Bradley Lawson had officially begun. He was sitting in a concrete cell, completely stripped of his freedom, while the violent world he tried to manipulate systematically erased every trace of his existence. The house was empty, the debt was mounting, and the real nightmare of his new life was just getting started. Life inside the maximum security federal detention center was a brutal, terrifying awakening for a man who had only ever known the soft, air-conditioned comfort of corporate offices. Bradley was placed in a crowded holding block, awaiting his formal arraignment, stripped of his custom-tailored suits and forced into a standard-issue coarse orange jumpsuit. But the thick concrete walls of a federal prison offer absolutely no protection from a criminal syndicate that is owed $10 million. The Apex Financial Group had an incredibly long and violent reach that extended far past the barbed wire fences and armed guards. On his third night in the holding facility, long after the cell block lights had been dimmed, 3 massive inmates cornered Bradley in the communal washroom. They did not ask for his side of the story. They simply delivered the severe, bone-crushing message their bosses on the outside had ordered. Bradley was beaten mercilessly against the cold concrete tiles. He suffered 3 fractured ribs, a shattered nose, and a violently dislocated jaw. When the prison guards finally intervened, Bradley was a broken, bloody mess, weeping on the damp floor. He quickly realized that his nightmare was not just a legal battle. It was a physical, inescapable torment that would follow him into whatever dark hole the justice system threw him into. While Bradley was learning the harsh physical consequences of his profound arrogance behind bars, his entire fabricated life on the outside was being systematically dismantled and erased. The financial institutions he had defrauded moved with ruthless mechanical efficiency. A fleet of heavy flatbed tow trucks arrived at the suburban neighborhood early one Tuesday morning. Under the watchful eyes of the local police and a crowd of whispering neighbors, the repossession agents attached heavy steel chains to the axles of the brand-new custom-built Porsche he had placed a deposit on. The luxury vehicle was unceremoniously dragged out of the driveway and hauled away to a secure impound lot. But the banks did not stop at the cars. Debt collectors and liquidators stormed the property, bagging up every single designer suit, expensive watch, and piece of high-end furniture Bradley had acquired during his short-lived fantasy. The few items that had no resale value were literally thrown out onto the curb like common garbage. His prized Italian leather shoes and silk ties lay scattered on the exact same wet grass where he had so proudly thrown my suitcase just a few weeks prior. The universe has a brilliant way of enforcing absolute poetic justice. As for the house itself, Evelyn Wright completely decimated the fraudulent mortgage contract Bradley had signed with the underworld syndicate. She presented the irrefutable evidence of the forged signature to a federal judge, along with sworn testimony from an independent handwriting expert and the cloned digital files proving his explicit intent to commit fraud. The judge instantly voided the illegal lien against the property, restoring the deed entirely to my name with absolute legal clarity. The syndicate had absolutely no legal leg to stand on to claim the real estate through the court system. The property was officially mine again, secure and completely free of any toxic debt. However, I did not pack my bags and move back in. I instructed Evelyn to immediately list the property on the open real estate market. It sold to a young, hardworking couple in less than 48 hours for a highly competitive cash offer. I had spent 10 years maintaining that property, fixing the roof and polishing the floors with my own two hands, but it was no longer my home. A true home is a place of peace, respect, and mutual love. The walls of that structure had been thoroughly infected by Bradley's relentless toxicity, his endless lies, and the profound disrespect he had shown to my family. Every room held a dark memory of his manipulation and the agonizing destruction of my daughter's marriage. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was just a hollow, soulless block of wood and concrete. I did not need to hold on to a physical building to validate my worth or preserve the beautiful memory of my late wife. True peace meant completely severing every single tie to the poisonous environment Bradley had created and starting completely fresh with a clean slate. As the moving trucks cleared the last of the staging furniture out of the old house, I was sitting comfortably in the private, secure office of my newly appointed wealth management firm downtown. The regional director of the State Lottery Commission had expedited the payout process following the highly publicized arrest of my son-in-law, eager to close the embarrassing chapter of the attempted fraud. I watched the glowing screen of the senior financial advisor's computer as the final official transaction was processed. The heavy state and federal taxes were instantly deducted, leaving a massive, staggering net sum securely deposited directly into my primary, heavily encrypted private account. It was more wealth than a retired union electrician could possibly spend in a dozen lifetimes. There was no flashing media circus, no popping champagne bottles, and no arrogant speeches on a concrete plaza. I simply nodded at the advisor, signed the final transfer confirmation, and closed the thick leather folder. The money was safe, protected by a fortress of legal trusts and maximum security digital barriers that no greedy opportunist could ever hope to penetrate. I had officially secured my future, my independence, and my absolute freedom. The heavy financial anxiety that had hovered over my head for the past decade, worrying about Jada's stability and Bradley's reckless spending, was permanently erased with a single massive keystroke. But the closure of my financial matters was only one half of the final equation. The wheels of the federal justice system turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Months passed as Bradley sat festering in a concrete cell, recovering from his brutal physical beatings and watching his entire world crumble from behind a thick sheet of reinforced glass. His court-appointed public defender tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal, hoping to lessen the severe blow of the mounting mountain of evidence. But the district attorney, fully armed with Evelyn's flawless portfolio of digital clones, video surveillance, and crystal-clear audio confessions, completely refused to offer a single inch of leniency. The state wanted a public trial, and they wanted to make a spectacular example out of the arrogant broker who had tried to manipulate the legal and financial system so brazenly. The brisk autumn wind was sweeping through the busy city streets on the morning the federal trial officially commenced. I adjusted the collar of my newly tailored charcoal suit and walked deliberately up the wide marble steps of the federal courthouse. Today was the day the final hammer would fall. It was time to look Bradley dead in the eyes and watch the judge read the absolute unchangeable cost of his immense greed in front of the entire world. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung open, revealing a cavernous space dominated by dark wood and absolute intimidating silence. The air inside felt heavy, sterile, and entirely unforgiving. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing against the polished floorboards, and took my seat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor table. A few moments later, the heavy side door near the judge's bench opened with a harsh, metallic clank. 2 armed federal marshals escorted Bradley into the room, and he was completely unrecognizable. The custom-tailored suits, the expensive designer loafers, and the arrogant swagger were entirely gone. He shuffled forward in a shapeless, bright orange prison jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy steel chains that rattled loudly with every pathetic step. His face was gaunt, his skin a sickly pale gray, and the lingering bruises from his violent encounter with the syndicate inmates painted ugly purple shadows across his cheekbones. He looked incredibly small, physically shrinking under the crushing weight of his inevitable doom. He did not look like a financial genius or a legendary multimillionaire. He looked exactly like what he truly was, a broken, terrified fraud who had finally run out of lies. The trial moved with a swift, mechanical brutality. Bradley's court-appointed defense attorney attempted to weave a weak, desperate narrative of a man caught up in an unfortunate misunderstanding, suggesting that his client was merely overzealous and confused by the complex lottery application process. But Evelyn Wright, acting as a special consultant to the district attorney, stepped forward to completely obliterate that ridiculous fantasy. She did not just present evidence. She orchestrated a flawless public execution of Bradley's entire character. She projected the forged property deed onto the massive digital screens in the courtroom, bringing forward an independent handwriting expert who testified under oath that Bradley had maliciously traced my signature to illegally secure the massive underworld loan. Then she played the crystal clear audio and video recordings. The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence as Bradley's own voice echoed through the high-definition speakers, casually discussing his plans to discard his wife, steal my home, and flee the country with his mistress the very moment the money cleared. Evelyn did not stop there. She submitted the digital logs from the cloned hard drive, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that his fraudulent actions were meticulously premeditated over several weeks. She laid out the paper trail of the Apex Financial Syndicate loan, demonstrating his direct, eager involvement with known organized crime figures. Every single piece of evidence was an undeniable heavy nail in his coffin. Bradley's defense attorney slowly closed his legal pad, set down his pen, and sank back into his leather chair, completely speechless. There was absolutely no cross-examination. There was no clever legal loophole to exploit. The mountain of digital forensics audio confessions and video surveillance was entirely insurmountable. Bradley sat at the defense table with his head hung low, staring blankly at his chained hands as his entire fabricated life was laid bare for the judge, the jury, and the press gallery to scrutinize. The federal justice system is a massive, unfeeling machine designed to maintain civil order, but inside that courtroom, it felt like something much more profound. It felt like a harsh, necessary cleansing. The law possesses absolutely no room for individuals who allow blinding greed to completely strip away their fundamental humanity. Bradley had casually discarded every single moral boundary to chase a desperate illusion of wealth. He viewed his marriage as a temporary stepping stone, his family as disposable assets, and my entire life of hard work as nothing more than a piggy bank waiting to be smashed open. When a man willingly trades his soul for a false promise of luxury, he forfeits the right to walk freely among decent society. The overwhelming evidence presented that morning proved that Bradley was not just a desperate financial criminal. He was a dangerous, toxic parasite who had to be permanently removed from the public sphere to protect anyone else from falling into his web of deceit. The trial concluded much faster than anyone anticipated. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning to the box with a unanimous verdict on every single count. The federal judge, a stern woman with decades of experience dealing with arrogant white-collar criminals, ordered Bradley to stand. The metallic clanking of his chains filled the quiet room as he rose to his feet on trembling legs. The judge looked down at him from her elevated bench with an expression of profound disgust. "Bradley Lawson," she stated, her voice ringing out with absolute finality, "your actions represent the absolute worst elements of human greed and deception. You maliciously targeted your own family, engaged willingly with violent criminal enterprises, and attempted to defraud a state institution with zero regard for the catastrophic consequences. You have shown absolutely no remorse, only regret that your fraudulent schemes were so thoroughly exposed. For the charges of first-degree financial fraud, grand larceny, malicious forgery, and criminal conspiracy, I sentence you to 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Furthermore, due to the severe premeditated nature of these offenses and the lack of any mitigating character evidence, this sentence will be served strictly without the possibility of early parole. The sharp strike of the judge's wooden gavel echoed like a gunshot, sealing his fate permanently. Bradley's knees completely buckled, and the two federal marshals had to forcefully grab his arms to keep him standing upright. As they turned him around to lead him toward the heavy steel door of the holding area, his wild, tear-filled eyes frantically scanned the gallery until they locked directly onto mine. He was weeping openly now, a pathetic, broken shell of a man staring at the very person he had tried to destroy. His mouth moved silently, mouthing the word, "Please," begging for a final shred of mercy, a comforting glance or some sign that he was not entirely abandoned. He was desperately searching for the quiet, forgiving father-in-law he had exploited for an entire decade. But that man no longer existed. I did not offer him a nod, I did not smile, and I did not show a single ounce of pity. I simply held his desperate gaze with eyes as cold and unyielding as the concrete cell he was about to call home. I slowly reached up, meticulously straightened my silk tie, and turned my back on him. I walked up the center aisle and pushed through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, stepping out into the bright, open hallway. I left him to his chains and his endless regrets. 2 weeks after the heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom closed on Bradley Lawson forever, I sat in a quiet, unassuming diner on the edge of town. The bell above the door chimed, and Jada walked in. She did not look like the woman who had paraded around high society tea parties just a month ago. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray sweater. She carried a cheap canvas tote bag instead of her usual imported leather purse. She slid into the vinyl booth across from me, keeping her eyes focused on the scratched table. She nervously twisted a paper napkin around her fingers. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked up. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know how terribly I treated you. But I am completely drowning. The creditors are calling every single day. I have nowhere to live. You have $90 million now. Could you just give me a few million? Just enough to buy a small condo, clear my debts, and start my life over?" I looked at my daughter. I looked at the dark circles under her eyes and the genuine exhaustion in her posture. A weak man or a father driven by misplaced guilt would have instantly reached into his coat pocket and written her a massive check. It would have been incredibly easy. $2 or $3 million was absolute pocket change to me now. But I did not reach for my checkbook. I kept my hands folded, resting calmly on the table. "No, Jada," I said, my voice steady, cold, and completely unyielding. "I am not going to give you a single dime." Her eyes widened, welling up with fresh tears, but I held up my hand to stop her before she could formulate a protest. "Money does not teach you how to be a decent human being." I continued, making sure every single word landed with heavy impact. "Handing you a few $1,000,000 right now would be the absolute worst thing I could ever do to you. It would only validate the toxic delusion that Bradley infected you with. It would teach you that there are easy shortcuts to success, and that you can completely abandon your morals, discard your own family, and still get bailed out by a massive pile of cash at the very last second. You wanted to live the high life without putting in the grueling work. Now you are going to learn exactly how the real world operates. You are going to start completely from scratch. You are going to find a job. You are going to wipe down tables, serve coffee, or scrub floors if you have to. You are going to rent a tiny apartment, and you are going to budget every single dollar you earn to pay your own rent and clear your own debts. You are going to sweat, you are going to struggle, and you are going to realize exactly how much labor goes into surviving. When you can look me in the eye and tell me you truly understand the profound value of a single hard-earned dollar, then we will sit down and have another conversation. Until then, my wallet is permanently closed to you. It was the hardest thing I had ever done as a parent. Every natural instinct in my body wanted to protect my child from pain. But true fatherly love is not about shielding your children from the necessary consequences of their own catastrophic choices. True love is having the iron discipline to step back and let them fall so they can finally learn how to stand up on their own 2 feet. Loretta and I built our entire lives from the ground up, valuing integrity, intense labor, and profound loyalty over superficial luxury. Giving Jada a massive financial bailout would have been a direct betrayal of everything her mother and I stood for. She needed to earn her pride, not just buy it. Jada sat in the booth, the tears silently spilling over her eyelashes and rolling down her cheeks. She did not scream at me. She did not throw a tantrum, flip the table, or hurl bitter insults the way her former husband would have done. She simply let the profound weight of my words settle over her. She knew I was absolutely right. The pain in her chest was not just from the financial rejection. It was the agonizing realization of how far she had fallen from the strong, independent woman she used to be. After a long, heavy silence, she reached up and wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. She nodded slowly, accepting her sentence without a single ounce of resentment. "You are right, Dad," she whispered softly. "I am so sorry for everything." She stood up from the booth, pushed her chair in, and walked out the glass doors of the diner, stepping out into the busy city streets to finally begin the grueling process of rebuilding her own life. 6 months later, the chaotic noise of the city, the dramatic courtrooms, and the suffocating presence of greedy opportunists were nothing more than a distant memory. I did not buy a sprawling concrete mansion or a fleet of ridiculous sports cars to show off my wealth. Instead, I purchased a beautiful, modest farm on the quiet, rolling outskirts of the state. It was a peaceful piece of land surrounded by ancient oak trees, lush green meadows, and a crystal-clear creek that ran right behind the main house. It was exactly the kind of quiet paradise Loretta and I had always dreamed about retiring to when I was still pulling double shifts at the electrical plant. I also put my vast wealth to genuine, meaningful use. I established a massive, heavily funded charitable trust dedicated specifically to supporting underfunded nursing homes and elderly care facilities. I made absolutely certain that vulnerable, forgotten seniors who had been thrown away by their own greedy families would receive top-tier medical care, comfortable housing, and profound respect in their final years. No one deserves to be discarded like trash simply because they have grown old. I stepped out onto my sprawling wooden wrap-around porch, the cool morning breeze carrying the sweet scent of pine and fresh soil. I sat down in a sturdy, handcrafted rocking chair and rested my boots on the wooden railing. I took a slow, deliberate sip from a ceramic mug of hot black coffee. I looked out over the vast, vibrant green meadow spreading out before me, listening to the gentle rustling of the leaves and the quiet, undeniable hum of absolute freedom. Bradley was sitting in a concrete cage, permanently stripped of his name, his status, and his future. Jada was working double shifts at a local bakery, paying her own bills, and finally learning the true meaning of character and resilience. And I was sitting exactly where I belonged. A soft, genuine smile spread across my face. People often say that revenge is a dish best served cold. They are entirely wrong. The absolute best, most devastating revenge you can ever achieve against those who try to destroy you is simply living a brilliant, profoundly peaceful life. If there is one final truth I want you to take away from all of this, it is that the loudest people in the room are usually the weakest. Bradley spent his entire life desperately trying to convince the world he was a giant, but he was nothing more than a fragile shadow crumbling at the first sign of real pressure. Real power does not need to shout or show off to strangers. Real power is built in the quiet, unseen moments of honest labor and unbreakable integrity. Never let the loud illusion of someone else's success make you doubt the solid foundation of your own hard work. Please let me know in the comments if you have ever had to teach someone a difficult lesson about respect, and make sure to subscribe for more stories just like this.